Doom was a revolutionary innovation in the first-person shooter genre. Where there are innovators, there are copycats and clones. Doom's design was so influential, and the only example at the time, that improvements were possible, but needed to be figured out on their own. Why I bring this up is because Doom is the main reason the game we're talking about today was possible in any sense of the word. Star Wars Dark Forces was made after fan mods of Doom taking place on the Death Star. Those at LucasArts decided to make a full-fledged first-person shooter set in the Star Wars universe. Star Wars Dark Forces is the original Star Wars first-person shooter. Before Republic Commando, this was the first pure FPS game. No third person, just the game from the perspective of the character. Since it will probably come up, my simplified thoughts on Doom is that it's fun but dated. It was the second piece of bedrock after Wolfenstein 3D, and there was a lot to be decided. After all, Doom Guy didn't even jump. Dark Forces was released for DOS in 1995, with a PlayStation 1 port coming later down the line. Dark Forces is not as accessible today because of its age. It's something modern players can't really grasp unless they go retro. Hell, the first time I beat this game was recording the footage for this game beginning to end. If you want to know why, I'll explain as the review goes on. After seeing the resurgence of Wolfenstein and Doom especially, I yearn for a remake, akin to what they're doing with Knights of the Old Republic. Obviously, I think it would probably have to be closer to modern Wolfenstein than modern Doom, because the thought of Kyle Katarn ripping open a stormtrooper's skull is both hilarious yet improper. Modern Wolfenstein would be better suited to a remake design-wise. Speaking of, Kyle Katarn is a household name in the expanded universe. While he's just the player character in Dark Forces, his very creation was influential as the future of the character is celebrated today. Originally they were going to just have Luke Skywalker, but their decision to make a new protagonist, I feel like, improved the game based on what little story there was. The story is not a huge focus of the game. It's the basic what we're doing and why kind of story. The game is pretty lacking in the cutscenes. To my recollection, there's 5 or 6 cutscenes with characters talking. It's not the game's fault. Example of good video game stories were limited at the time, and they didn't need a groundbreaking story. To the game's credit, there actually is a story. We know why we're doing stuff. Unlike Doom, where it just drops you into the game with no context. With all that out of the way, let's get into the game's flesh and bones. I played this game on Steam, and tried my hardest to organically play the game. I was sometimes forced to look stuff up, but we'll save that for a better time. First off, the first level takes place before A New Hope. What we're doing in the first level was always funny to me because it contrasts Rogue One heavily. We're stealing the Death Star plans, but we didn't need an army to take those plans by force. Instead, we are the army. A one-man army to be exact. Kyle Katarn is stated in the title crawl as being an Imperial defector, and he was so cool, he didn't even need to be fully equipped when preparing for the mission. Like, they wanted the player to start off with a crappy pistol, like in Wolfenstein or Doom, but that's not the point. Ironically, the Briar Blaster pistol, Katarn's iconic weapon, is more useful and has more of a punch than the pistol in Doom. That's the first positive. The gunplay is excellent. All weapons have a unique use to them. In the opening level, we only get the Briar Blaster pistol in the E11. I suppose the theft of the Death Star plans isn't as dramatic as Rogue One, and Scarif certainly made for a more appealing in-universe location than just a generic-looking Imperial base in the middle of nowhere. But stealing the plans comes across as Kyle Katarn being a full-on Psycho Rambo, murdering every Imperial in sight, and taking those plans by force. Honestly, who needs the Virgin Rogue One crew when we have the Chad Kyle Katarn? He can steal the plans without blinking and make it out alive at that. An additional thing I wanted to talk about is that the Death Star plans being stolen is a common trope in Star Wars video games, and each is different from the last, but Empire at War contextualized it as there are fragments of the plans being stolen at the same time, and in Dark Forces' case, they call it Operation Skyhook Phase 2, meaning that there was a Phase 1. That could have been any other of the games in action, like Battlefront 2 for example. Explaining it like that, they can get away with stealing the Death Star plans multiple times without there being continuity errors. The only thing they need to do now is connect every version of the plans being stolen into one, and form a collected narrative, which they're yet to do. Anyways, the level is short but sweet, navigation is easy, and again, the gunplay is satisfying. A huge improvement over Doom, which also had impressive gunplay. Even though we only have 2 weapons in the first level, both of them managed to be different. The Briar Blaster pistol is a precision weapon with a slower fire rate, while the E11 is the opposite. In Doom, the pistol is a last resort weapon in the late game if you run out of ammo. In this game, they managed to make it a useful weapon I used often, because as a precision weapon that harms weaker enemies, you also need to save up ammo, and the Briar Blaster pistol with a slower fire rate does the trick. It's not always a good idea to use the E11 simply because missing is a waste of ammo. Like in Doom, there's no reload, but instead managing your ammo is the caveat to being a Psycho Rambo. With that being said, the stealing of the Death Star plans was more of a prologue, as our actions caused the rebellion to destroy the Death Star. But as the rebellion celebrates the victory, a new sinister plot is set in motion by the Empire. Or at least that's how the narrator describes it. This is where we meet the main antagonist. Vader greets General Rom Mock, a decorated Imperial higher-up, who has worked on a new unit for the Empire, the Dark Trooper. Yep, the Mandalorian certainly has a lot to answer for ripping off this part of the expanded universe. I've said previously that the Mandalorian feels like a video game, and how appropriate, given the Dark Trooper literally originates from a Wolfenstein/Doom inspired shooter. Dark Troopers in the Mandalorian were just crappy obstacles, meant to sell toys. Dark Troopers are the sorts of units better suited to video games. Vader and General Mock have an admirable respect for one another, and Mock is confident that the Dark Trooper can see to the end of the rebellion. He says that they will destroy the rebellion just as they did the Jedi Knights. So he launches the Dark Troopers on a rebel base. Afterwards, Kyle is summoned by the rebel fleet and Mon Mothma, and she informs him on insight provided by Crix Madine, a minor character from Return of the Jedi, who is seeking to defect to the Alliance because the Empire is evil and should die. Kyle hears a distress message from Amon Calamari, which is really just ripped from Akbar in Return of the Jedi, but the point is, Katarn seems to notice unusual sounds during the recording, which is then revealed to be the Dark Trooper. A new trooper that can destroy rebel bases. Impressions on this is pretty good. Despite the minimal story, the game does a good job about making the Dark Troopers look like a good threat based on the cutscenes alone. Mon Mothma tells us that rebel staff, as well as many unnamed innocent people, were killed. And that does feel kinda cheap, because it's, the Empire's evil for indiscriminately killing. Which is whatever. Katarn, of course, being the badass that he is, agrees to stop the Dark Trooper program, requesting Jan Ors to brief him on missions from now on out. Who's Jan Ors? Another new character the game made up. Based on interactions in this game alone, they seem like good acquaintances. The next level is investigating the rebel base that was attacked by the Dark Troopers, now occupied by Imperial forces. So the next level commences. Going into the level, it's pretty good. There's even a new factor at play, lighting. You'll be in the dark since the power's shut off, and so you'll need to illuminate the light somehow. It takes some time to reactivate the power. So until then, you'll probably get ambushed by stormtroopers and the like. The atmosphere in level 2 is quite immersive. In fact, all the levels feel different in their own way. Strolling around the level, you'll notice skeletal corpses of deceased rebels all over. Their remains charred and unrecognizable. It's quite creepy, and it subconsciously tells you that the Dark Trooper is not to be taken lightly. When we find the power switch, we must traverse to another part of the base to look for evidence on what the Dark Trooper is. Crawling all over, Imperial forces must be taken out. This level is rather simple. Turn the power back on, find evidence of the Dark Trooper, return to ship. After a decently easy search, we find a weapon too large for human hands. I wonder Kyle Katarn can carry it then. Well, to be fair, I saw a card that depicted Kyle Katarn holding 10-ish weapons, so maybe he's that strong. Anyways, we retrieve the weapon and make it back to the ship. The next level I used to despise when I first played the game. This level is also representative of a much hated video game trope, the sewer level. To be honest, I mostly find this level to be simply okay now, but back then, I hated this level. The context for this mission is that the clue we retrieved led us to a fiercely loyal Imperial moth named Rebus. This guy looks like the stereotypical Italian-American pizza slob. We're sent down into the sewers to capture him. And level 3 doesn't start off that bad. It's a dirty, dingy area, a disgusting atmosphere, but nothing too gross. Basically, what you're supposed to do here is get all the gates to Rebus open. You must go through different tunnels and swim. Kyle must be used to this stuff, because he sure is willing to swim through sewer water. The real problem in this level are those Dianogas, the creature that wrangled Luke in A New Hope. This time, there's more than one. There's around a dozen. Perhaps more. So many of them come at you. A big reason I hated this level was because they kept jump scaring me. I already hated the Dianoga in A New Hope. This was a nightmare. Also again, the area is so dark, you need to illuminate a source of light. Since I don't use the headlight unless I absolutely need to, I relied on the map and the blaster. Speaking of, the map sort of helps. Just like in Doom, it's not that understandable for navigation, but it does help to get you recognizing whether you've been in an area previously or not. If you're in a confusing labyrinth of a level, the map does squat. There's also a part of the sewer level where you go through these fast tunnels that lead back out to the main area. You go super fast. Faster than an airline toilet. With that being said, when you finally get to Rebus's lair, if you can call it that, you'll have to endure the most stiff, slippery parkour you'll ever do. Dark Forces added a jump button, which added the ability to jump up ledges and across areas, but since this was still in the early days of first-person shooters, it's not perfected. The jumping in Doom Eternal, for example, is smooth and controllable. You don't feel like it's a hassle to jump. It's as simple as it is in real life. Anyways, in this part, you'll be required to jump. Man, is this stuff done so much better in the sequel. I'd also like to mention there's a fast and slow run toggle in the caps lock button. Neither is suited perfectly for everything, and I tend to switch whenever I do parkour. Too fast and you'll slip off. Too slow and you won't make the jump. In each level, you are given a minimum of 3 lives. Making incorrect jumps on deep chasms is very costly. I appreciate that Fallen Order just takes a bit of health away, and that's it. Dark Forces is not so forgiving. You also get a semi-checkpoint of sorts when you respawn after dying. Of course, lose all your lives, and you're doing everything all over again. Focusing back on the level, you need to take out new enemies like Grants that punch you in close range and throw grenades in far range. Thermal detonators aren't a joke. I can see why everyone took them seriously when Leia pulled one out in Return of the Jedi. Anyhow, we also get torture droids, which are easy to take out. They're mostly sort of like an annoying pest sort of enemy, like the Sentinels in Halo. Rebus set a bunch of traps, not enough to deter Kyle though, and we see this dude as a still image. He's smiling, sitting, and holding a pretty sweet looking rifle. I want it. Too bad though. On the upside, Rebus doesn't move, so he can't attack us. We also don't have to drag him back. We can just end the mission here. The briefing for the next mission has Rebus reveal that there's a testing facility on Fest, a super random planet, that I believe was also in Rogue Squadron, and aside from its appearance in retro games, it's notable for only one other thing. It's Cassian Andor's homeworld. Funny how Andor will be super relevant soon given he's getting a pointless Disney Plus spin-off. Playing through this level with the knowledge that Cassian Andor was born here in the Disney timeline, I'm like, is this it? It doesn't look very habitable for a planet in Dark Forces. It reminds me of when Poe Dameron's homeworld was Yavin 4, simply because Oscar Isaac was Guatemalan, and the set for Yavin 4 was in the respective country. Anyways, the first part of the level is a canyon. The scenery is pretty boring, not gonna lie. It gets way better when we get to the Imperial base, but for now, we need to find the Imperial base. That takes around 5 to 10 minutes. Doesn't sound long, but I'd rather it be like the first mission where we're already in the base like a spy or something. This is where I bring up the game's greatest flaw. Confusing level design. Let's get something out of the way. This game is a blast. if you know where you're going. If you don't, the game becomes tedious and boring. Looking at what the game is actually like, once you start getting into the later weapons and stuff, the game was surprisingly fun. It may be overshadowed by shooters of today, but the game is actually pretty well designed for something so simple. This is an expansion of Wolfenstein 3D and OG Doom. They fully utilized the technology based on those games and improved it. Since this is where you start getting the mid-tier weapons, the game just gets better and better. That's a good thing. Being more invested to play a game as it goes on is a rarity nowadays. Mostly you just get bored as you get to the end, or sameness the whole way through. What this game does is the best particular feeling. When we get into the base, this is where the level starts getting really confusing. I hate confusing levels. I don't want the game to hold my hand, but I also want it to be obvious enough where the hell I'm going. I don't want to be confused. Also, in my playthrough, whenever I was stuck, I started thinking about the in-universe layout. The stormtroopers must have a lot of memory of this place, otherwise they'd get lost. This level also starts utilizing keys and codes you need to enter to progress. Memorizing is a total hassle. When we finally get to the central chamber, where our main objective is, we have to switch buttons in order to get a certain pattern to get the medal. The medal in question is Frick, and unlike Babu Frick, it's less memeable because of the spelling and how it sounds less dumb. Fun fact, Frick is the metal that was used to make Palpatine's lightsabers. When we get to the medal, I hightail it out of there, and we finally get to the level that I was specifically stuck on until this very playthrough. The Gromus mines. This is where the Frick is being mined, so we gotta blow it up. We must be really starting to annoy the Empire. But anyways, let's get into it. Gromus has a similar look to Mars in OG Doom. I was not really a fan of Mars as a planet beyond the hypothetical talks of colonies there and alien sightings and shit. I mean, the planet was interesting enough, but as the setting to a Doom game, I just didn't like it. So basically what I'm going to say about this level is that it has a lot of platforming, and it's a long drop, which will contribute to a lot of health lost. Aside from getting a new weapon, which isn't that good, figuring out where you're supposed to go is a hassle. Plus we've got keys again. This is something I wish they scrapped from Doom, because it's annoying. It's basically like a fetch quest almost, but not quite. I mean, you do have to fetch something, but it's not quite like a fetch quest. There's also a possibility of being crushed by machinery, which you have to wait to traverse. When you eventually get to the damn charges, you have your first encounter with the almighty Death Trooper. Phase 1 Dark Troopers are fast, zippy sons of bitches, but having no gun attached made it seem underwhelming from a presentation standpoint. It's the opposite of a bad enemy, but I was expecting a little more blow me away-y. There's also the part when you escape, where you have to wait for the doors to open on a pressure plate to run through all of it in one go. That's sort of weird, and it is a common video game trope. Completing the level and making it back to the ship, we see that Crix Maydeen, our informant, has been captured, held at gunpoint by Rom, Mock, and Vader. The two villains talk about how Katarn is becoming a threat, slowing the production of the Dark Trooper. I wish this game would be remade because the cutscene here has great potential for a fleshed out story. Mock mentions how Katarn was a fine Imperial, but turned his back on the New Order. The game doesn't elaborate on why Katarn left the Empire, it's mostly the sequel that expands that. Apparently in the books, Mock met Katarn at the Imperial Academy, so there is a pre-established connection between the hero and the villain. Why I yearn for this game to be remade is so there's a more personal conflict, like perhaps Katarn once admired Mock, but after defecting and growing to hate the Empire, he is conflicted or something. Again, this game was not designed to be story-rich, but it's still interesting to think about. In this game, there's no connection between the protagonist and the antagonist. There is in the books, I hear again, but not in the actual game. So since we are mowing down Imperials and doing real damage to the Empire, what do Mock and Vader do? They employ the services of a bounty hunter. You want to know who it is? Why yes, it's none other than Bobby Fett. Yeah, this game has a lot of cameos. Keep in mind, this was made before the prequels. A lot of expanded universe content before then relied on recurring characters. It's also weird that they used archival footage from Empire Strikes Back. It shows. Now comes my least favorite level in the whole game, where we have to do the classic jailbreak and rescue Crix Medine if we want any more insight into the Dark Trooper project. First, we have to enter the prison, and then the level really starts becoming terrible. There's a lot of convoluted elevator doors with mines all over the place. You have to be a goddamn reflex expert to dodge the mines. In other Star Wars games, mines are reasonably dodgeable, but the thing is here, they aren't. I said there are convoluted elevator floors. You basically need to get key cards and codes and whatnot from every single floor, and the whole layout is confusing. Plus there's a lot of backtracking. I spent an hour trying to figure out what to do after my problem-solving skills ran out. For once in this entire playthrough, I had to look up how to get past the stuff. The solution of what I was supposed to do was so batshit, I couldn't believe anyone had the patience to figure it out. Basically, what you're supposed to do is send the elevator down, then go into the vents through the open hatch, make a leap of faith into a level inaccessible by usual elevator traversal. This is so cornered off. I feel so bad for stormtroopers who have to do this in-universe in order to properly guard the prison. There's probably a lot of workplace accidents here. Anyways, we finally get to the right prison floor, and we need the right code to get a specific door open, and once we do that, we finally got Crix Medine freed from Imperial custody. Did that sound convoluted? That's because it is. You know, with the other levels, the puzzle of figuring out what you're supposed to do is half reasonable in hindsight, but this ain't it. I'm never doing this level again. In the next briefing, we get insight onto who leads the Dark Trooper project. Ron Mock is a decorated veteran of the Clone Wars, but not decorated enough to be featured in TCW. Damn you, Filoni! If I had done TCW, you bet all these obscure expanded universe characters would have been in my show. Ram Koda, Ron Mock, Hugh Ran, Jarek, Joris Sabayoth, Gil Pelion, Morgan Katarn, etc. If they existed, I'm including them. Anyways, we're supposed to place a tracking device on a smuggling ship in order to track down where Mock's ship, the Arkhammer, is. So with that being said, let's do this. This is where I start having an easier time with the game. I'm getting more and more weapons. Although the level is familiar in layout, it is reasonably completable. You've got a lot of gangster enemies like the Gran and Gamorreans, who as long as you shoot at them, they'll be pushed back and you'll be fine. There's a lot of crates, and eventually you'll come across scenery that looks like the Tantive 4 in A New Hope. This area gives off a nostalgic feeling, honestly. It's quite soothing. We've also got enemies in the urinals doing stuff. Man, what a bizarre Easter egg. There was one part where, since I couldn't directly look up and shoot, and jumping and shooting wouldn't help, I was forced to use grenades to progress. And if I didn't have any grenades, I would have been permanently stuck. Also, you need quite an accurate throw. You sort of need to time grenades in order for their effectiveness and range. Next, we've got Antivi, one of the best levels in the game. Going into this expecting to be confused, this level probably has one of the best varieties in scenery. When you start it, it looks like a generic snow level, but as you'll realize, the ice is slippery, and you need to acquire some spike boots or whatever. We've also got the conveyor belt that you need to progress. Conveyor belts in this game are extremely fun to navigate. It's something I like in games in general. Moving faster or slower adds new dynamics to gameplay, and passing by enemies and firing at them is a blast. The level is nowhere near confusing, and it's also easy to make jokes about it, like, is that melted cheese? That's what it looks like. We're also required to put on a gas mask in order to prevent health loss, because the cheese smells so bad. We set charges, and to top the level off, we've got the Dark Trooper Phase 2. Man, this is what the Gromus mine should have started with, honestly. The Phase 2 Dark Trooper is tough, fast, and versatile. You need fast movement and proper aiming in order to effectively beat it. This is my turnaround for my Dark Forces playthrough. I was having a lot of fun here. It seems that the levels became more detailed and varied. As in the next level, we go to the commonly visited Nar Shaddaa, the Smuggler's Moon. With that being said, we navigate the area. To be honest, I was stuck, but when my problem-solving skills kicked in, it was no bore to play. We also got concussion Trandoshans. They're fucking snakes, I hate them. It also did kinda suck that finding keys was another part of the game, because in this particular instance, it slowed things down, but it didn't grind it to a halt, because I, at this point, would have been hunting for keys the same way I hunt for chocolate eggs during Easter. Then we've got one of the highlights of the game, the Jabba ship level. Jabba captures Kyle and Jan and throws us into a pit with a hungry dragon, missing all our equipment. I was looking for an exit during this fight until I realized defeating the dragon was as simple as strafing and punching enough times. When I realized that, the level progressed. Retrieving my equipment was relatively quick, and this was the part I really had to start managing my ammo. This is good, by the way. It makes the game more challenging. The scenery is well designed, and the levels are far from too confusing to make the game boring. Another solid level. Our objective is to find Jan, and in this level we've got lots of mines and Grands who throw grenades. Those both require great reflexes, and the ship is semi-cramped, so it makes the whole thing fair but challenging. We also need to collect an Imperial navigation device that Jabba possesses. In order to figure out where the Arc Hammer is, we need to go to the heart of the Empire, Coruscant. Since this was before the Phantom Menace, Coruscant still looks weird, but it's the unique style I actually really like. This level is also a blast to play, infiltrating to the tops of the highest levels of the Imperial capital, mowing down all types of enemies. They really do not hold back here. Basically what I'm doing here is making a way to a central vault where I was able to decrypt the navigation device. Then comes the only caveat in the whole level, the super convoluted, confusing vault puzzle. Basically, we need to get certain doors open to enter the vault. This one relies on very good memory on where open doors are, and making your way into the vault, this is pretty frustrating, but I suppose I know why the Empire designed it like this. One of my greatest triumphs in this game was figuring out the puzzle without looking it up on the internet. That remains my proudest moment while playing this game. Then it's all the way back to the start of the level, and ambush! Bobby Fett shows up and sprays missiles and blasts of fire at you. You wish you could have his jetpack, but that's an item for another game. Basically what I did is strafe and fire endless bullets until Bobby Fett collapsed under his own weight. All hail Kyle Katarn. Now we're in the climax of the game. First we need to infiltrate a fuel station and sneak aboard a cargo ship headed for the Executor. The fuel station has sort of a confusing layout, but it's perfectly reasonable to figure out what you're supposed to do. There's a lot of explosive barrels, so that's stuff you gotta avoid. And the stormtroopers now start to overwhelm you, so you now gotta stay one step ahead of them. You will start running out of lives. Thankfully I never ran out completely in my playthrough, and the game is hard enough on easy. Then comes the Executor. An interesting idea that I had that wasn't used in the game is what if Vader could be randomly encountered in this level and you had to do everything to avoid him? It's an interesting idea that could have been in the game, but the level we get is short but sweet. We make our way to the Arc Hammer so we can finally destroy it and put down the Dark Troopers for good. Since the level is short, there's not much I have to say about it. Then we've got the final level. To be honest, I never thought I'd complete this game, but doing YouTube motivates you to do a lot of things, doesn't it? Since we need to set charges to the Arc Hammer, we mowed down all Imperials in sight. Surprisingly, they didn't spam Dark Troopers, which I guess maybe there's more in higher difficulties. I've been told there is. The game is still challenging at the end. After setting all the charges, we come to terms with the final boss, Rom Mok as the Phase 3 Dark Trooper. I used my best weapon, the plasma cannon, to run him into the ground. Then I took an Imperial shuttle and hightailed the fuck out of there. We see Vader disappointed at the rebellion's victory, and we get the classic celebratory ending, with Kyle Katarn getting a Medal of Honor and flying out in his ship to the stars until his next big adventure. And that was Star Wars Dark Forces. At first I thought this game was going to be way too dated for me to play and enjoy for my full walkthrough, and while it has its cracks, it's still a good game. The graphics are actually pretty good and faithful to the look of Star Wars, mostly the original trilogy, but hey, this is set during the original trilogy. Kyle Katarn may not yet be a household name, but they certainly made him the mirror Doom guy within the context of this game. Dark Forces may be lacking a multiplayer mode, but the campaign, it seems like they totally would have been worth the price back then. The game is around 6 hours long on average, forgetting navigation and stuff. That's not long by any stretch, but for a game in the 90s, that's sizable enough. Computers in the 90s were primitive to today. The game has minor flaws like bad parkour and mostly useless equipment, but this was the definitive first-person shooter in the Star Wars franchise before Republic Commando took its place. Obviously, Republic Commando is way more accessible, but I wouldn't discount the well-designed spin on 90s FPS games in Dark Forces. The game had a bare-bones story, but it had a story and context for what you were doing. It took advantage of Doom's leap forward and further improved the game. It's not a Doom ripoff with a Star Wars skin. The enemies are different, the engine has been upgraded and modified, and there's many innovations that make it stand apart. Honestly, Dark Forces was a completely fulfilling experience. I totally recommend this if you're suited to 90s FPS games, but if you're not that kind of gamer, it might be hard to get used to. Dark Forces overall gets an 8.3 out of 10 for what it's worth. It's old, it's less accessible, but a good game shines through all that. I'm fully satisfied that I finally beat this game. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories about mystery boxes? I started making this video the day Dark Forces 2 got its 25th anniversary, which, regarding that, happy 25th anniversary to Dark Forces 2. I discussed the original Dark Forces and how fun and well made it was, despite its age. So no shit they made a sequel 2 years later. Kyle Katarn was an already established but no-name character that definitely needed some character work, and thanks to this sequel, we have that. Just like Dark Forces was an improvement upon Doom, Dark Forces was an improvement upon games like Quake. Since this is a Star Wars game though, it fully utilizes its identity. As the full title suggests, we get to play as a Jedi in a 3D space. For the age of early 3D, that sounds exciting, and playing the game for myself, I can certainly see where the acclaim came from. Wikipedia cites this game as one of the best of all time, like apparently it's up there with KOTOR. That's extremely interesting. I didn't know it had that reputation until doing some research for this video. A bunch of the designers for the original Dark Forces returned for the sequel, and despite making a more advanced game, I gotta say that my enjoyment level is similar to the original Dark Forces. The footage shown is actually my second complete playthrough of Dark Forces 2 ever. I had completed the game already before I started making this video, and with that being said, my second playthrough was mostly pure, but I did rely on cheat codes for the final 2 levels, just so I could get all the footage I needed. Dark Forces 2 was released in 1997 to the PC exclusively. The way the game was designed, that kind of makes sense. It's a less accessible game than the original, but it's an improvement nonetheless. Jumping from Dark Forces 1 to 2 is like jumping from day to night. Just like the rest of the game industry in the 90s, Star Wars games just kept going ahead. As I heard, Rogue Squadron, for example, had incredible draw distances on the N64. Anyways, since this video is about the sequel to Dark Forces, let's get into it. Dark Forces 2's opening cutscene is the classic title crawl. God, I miss those in Star Wars games. Anyways, around a year after Return of the Jedi, the Rebel Alliance are in the process of building their new republic, yet face opposition by numerous Imperial factions, including the Dark Jedi, led by a former Imperial Inquisitor, Jarek. Looking at this guy on Wikipedia, he has quite an interesting backstory. He was actually the apprentice of Jedi librarian Jocasta Nu from Attack of the Clones. He was always interested in the dark side and what he could achieve personally, and was outside the known galaxy when Order 66 was issued, and upon returning, gave himself up to the Empire and became an Inquisitor. Anyways, Jarek is motivated by the goal of ultimate power, seeking out the legendary Valley of the Jedi. With little expanded universe knowledge, something like the Valley of the Jedi doesn't seem plausible with the prequel trilogy, but after reading Darth Bane Path of Destruction and realizing the history and significance of the Valley of the Jedi, I am totally on board with it. But that's a discussion for another time. Point being, this story, despite its seemingly unconnected nature, because none of the characters from the films are in it, or even mentioned, it's actually a very connected story. I will presume Luke Skywalker was somewhere else jacking off when Jarek was setting forth his dark plans. After the title crawl, the first sight we get is a visual reference to Star Wars A New Hope. Hugh Ron, a Jedi who survived Order 66, has a ship boarded by Jarek and the Dark Jedi. Jarek interrogates Ron on the location of the Valley of the Jedi. I presume he probes his mind, and figures out that a man named Morgan Katarn knows the location of the Valley of the Jedi. Right off the bat, we see that this whole thing is in live action in front of a green screen. I think this is interesting. The acting quality is cheesy, but surprisingly entertaining. The guy who plays Jarek seems to have a lot of fun in the role, as he's playing an imposing, power-hungry villain that taunts his enemies at every turn. It's simple characterization for a villain, but that's all it needs for a game like this. This was made in the 90s if you forgot. Ron, after being extracted from the information he has, grabs one of the Dark Jedi's lightsabers and causes a brief ruckus, cutting one of the Dark Jedi in half. He is quickly subdued by Jarek, and Jarek beheads him in a flash, leading to the main title. This is quite an effective way to start the game. The way it's presented, it's brutal and ruthless on Jarek's part, and the actor does a really good job for a 90s video game. Easily the best actor in the live action cutscenes. So who's the second best? Well, when we start a new game, it starts on Nar Shaddaa, the moon of Nal Hutta. We were also here in the original Dark Forces, so it's nice to see some familiarity. Our reintroduction to the protagonist, Kyle Katarn, starts with him looking at a hologram recording of him and his father before he passed away. The recording has his father congratulate him on making it to the Imperial Academy, and how he wishes his mother were alive to see it. Now, most of the actors in the cutscenes are very quippy. Morgan Katarn's actor actually stands out as being more serious. The way he says things has a touch of sincerity to them. The music in the scene also helps, mostly recycled from John Williams in the original trilogy. Morgan Katarn has a more personal side to him in the presentation of the story, because he's a big part of Kyle's connection to the villain. Soon afterwards, a droid, AT-88, a rogue information broker, gives Kyle the information he seeks. Kyle is looking for information on who killed his father. 88 finally tells him that the one who killed his father is a Dark Jedi named Jarek. Then 88 tells him that Jarek has great plans for the rebirth of the Empire, but Kyle ain't brave enough for petty political struggles. But then 88 has a gun pointed to his head. 88 presents him with an encrypted disc, saying how he found it in his father's home, and offering to not blow his brains out if he tells him what it is. Kyle refuses, and so 88 gets up to leave Kyle to his fate. When 88 leaves, Kyle turns the tables on the goon and instead pulls a blaster on his face. So yeah, the actor who plays Kyle, Jason Court, is certainly the second best behind Jarek. I actually tried reaching out to Jason Court once on Facebook for an interview, but he didn't respond. But hey, it didn't hurt to ask, right? I do have a desire to interview lesser known Star Wars actors if I get big enough as a YouTuber, but I'm getting off track. Jason Court's only notable role is this game, and his likeness was used for the basis of the character moving forward, so we have a lot to thank from him. According to a friend of mine, he did an interview where he said that he wasn't really into Star Wars, it was just a job he did, and he retired from acting years ago to become a winemaker. Still though, I've seen that he semi-embellished his role as Kyle Katarn on his social media, so it's not like he completely ignores his influence on the Star Wars fandom and the Jedi Knight series. Anyways, Jason Court does a good job in the role of Kyle Katarn. His quips are memeable as all hell, such as the one he says at the start of the second level. But again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. The level design in Dark Forces 2, for starters, is way less confusing. Any times I got stuck ever was me mostly not coming across switches I should have noticed, and nothing I would fault the game designers over. In the jump to 3D, you can switch to third person. Even with blasters, I prefer to go into third person for this game. Maybe it's better to see more of your surroundings. Like the last game, all we start with is the Briar Blaster pistol, Katarn's iconic weapon. This weapon for the most part is crap, and the only thing worse is the fist. Get the E11 blaster as soon as possible. Trust me, it's for your own good. The whole level consists of going across Nar Shaddaa, killing enemies. The level is pretty straightforward. You're not going to get stuck unless you really suck at video games. Aiming is easier, and auto-aim is on, so the shooting never becomes frustrating. You can aim properly, and also shoot who you intend to shoot, sometimes over long distances. Shooting is less accurate, and you can seem to miss hits you thought you would have, but this is a minor flaw. Enemies mostly consist of thugs, including the bare-fisted, guys with blasters, and Rhodians with pistols. At every corner there's enemies, and there's this one part with an elevator lift thingy where you must ascend to progress. Along the way in most levels, there are civilians who just stand around and do stuff. Most players, I presume, would just kill them, because why not? Killing innocent people in games has the same sort of appeal like in Grand Theft Auto. Although it's fun to do so, the unknowledgeable player just made the biggest mistake of their lives if they wanted to get the good ending first. Ahead of its time was a morality bar that displays both the light and the dark side, and how you interact with civilians affects the ending you will get. While it is quite simplistic, it's a good template for future Star Wars games to follow. This predates KOTOR by 6 years. I suppose it would be nice to have more complex decisions like how you approach a level or scripted encounters. I'm willing to cut some slack here. Being an angel and not killing civilians is harder than you think. It's very tempting, but temptations lead to the dark side. Back on the first level, it's very aesthetically similar to the original Dark Forces, so it's nice to see they can get the look of planets consistent throughout the expanded universe and the OG 6 films, unlike some other content. This level in general takes around 10 minutes to beat, so not very long. I managed to complete it in 8 minutes, which to describe how I approached this game, I stuck by every encounter properly, which led to around 5.5 hours of playtime. So the game is only slightly shorter than what it took to play Dark Forces. But then you realize it took more time with Dark Forces because I was confused. Here, not so much. I had a surprisingly easier time with navigation. Levels were more straightforward and weren't intentionally designed to require a YouTube search to find things before YouTube was even created. Whenever I missed something, it was my fault rather than the game's fault 9 times out of 10. So the level design has been significantly improved. Completing level 1, Kyle Katarn utters one of his most iconic one-liners.
Leaving so soon?
He blasts the discs out of 88's arm, but 88 himself escapes. Then a TIE bomber shows up to subdue Kyle, but soon afterwards, the Moldy Crow shows up to save the day, and we get reintroduced to Jan Ors. Once just the character to give you a briefing, she's now a fully realized supporting character. Jan doesn't have much time to stick around for long, as some TIE fighters show up while Kyle plans to retrieve the disc. The disc itself is easier to grab, but soon afterwards, we gotta find our way back up. This leads Kyle across a new enemy type, Grenaders. They throw thermal detonators so much that dodging is near impossible, most likely because the next one will get you. The level includes a pipe system. Before we make it back to the streets, and then we're supposed to go through moving crates in a factory-like area, until we get some platforming. Unlike the last game, parkour is much more precise and controllable, so if you fall, then it's on you. It's around the time I'd like to mention that this game, instead of having a checkpoint or live system, the game expects you to save manually. A lot of 90s games did this, so it's nothing special. With that being said, I remembered to quick save often, as not doing so would often spell certain doom. Anyhow, once we get to the top, Kyle is wounded from all the fighting, so he goes to receive treatment from a New Republic fleet. It's here where Kyle gets a vision in his sleep. This game really embodies the spirit of the original trilogy, as the Force theme plays, and the deceased Q-Ran from the opening cutscene speaks to Kyle. He tells Kyle about all that is at stake. Jarek, the man who murdered his father, searches for a sacred place, the Valley of the Jedi. The story establishes that Jarek cannot get the power of the Valley of the Jedi. The Valley is explained as being the resting place of many trapped souls from long ago. The Valley of the Jedi offers so much power from the combined souls that if Jarek captures it, he will become all-powerful. Simple and digestible. The story is rather simple, but that ain't a bad thing. It has the same spirit as the original trilogy, and embodies what we all love about Star Wars. Kyle, with the disc in hand, is going back to his father's old home on the planet Saloon because the encrypted disc is useful there. Jan will take care of the crow in his absence. Meanwhile, the Imperials take apart the roof of Morgan Katarn's old workshop, containing the map to the Valley of the Jedi. Kyle arrives just when the Imperial shuttle takes off. Jarek's Imperial remnant is going to give 88 the map to decipher at Baron's Head. The level starts, and it's essentially an abandoned homestead that is surprisingly large, that is being infested with this planet's version of the Tusken Raiders, who serve as the enemies in this level. A lot of them carry Wookiee bowcasters, which, contrary to how they're presented in the films, isn't that useful of a weapon. It has a slow fire rate, and presumably a moderate damage level. It's just not practical during a battle. To get inside Kyle's dad's house, you need to shoot open an entrance on the side, and as well as this, manage to dodge all incoming attacks. This level is very precise at times, because despite the bowcaster's inefficiency for the player, it's absolutely effective when there's swarms of enemies coming at you. This level also has some reasonable problem solving, where you have to swim underwater, and there's even a part where you have to avoid landing in acid, otherwise it takes health away. Overall, a very solid level, and the final level without a Jedi's iconic weapon. Kyle enters his father's old workshop and inserts the encrypted disc into his father's personal droid, in which a message plays. Morgan Katarn, with a message intended for his son, leaves two very important items. The first is a map to the Valley of the Jedi, embedded on the roof, which the Imperials have already taken. The second is a lightsaber, that belonged to a friend and great Jedi, Q-Ran. Morgan Katarn closes the message by telling Kyle beyond the grave to use it well. Use it for good. The performance here from Morgan's actor feels pretty sincere, topped with the music from the films. This here symbolizes a similar journey to Luke Skywalker almost. Kyle Katarn will learn to become a Jedi and honor his father's memory. I suppose the key difference is that Kyle's father really is dead, and there is a man responsible for it all that Kyle must not learn to kill in anger if he is to become a Jedi. After 3 levels, we finally got a lightsaber. And it's green. I presume Ron was a Jedi Counselor. Green, I feel, is actually a pretty good color to choose for this game. It feels like a middle ground. Anyways, the lightsaber is pretty fun to use, but all other weapons don't just cease their usefulness. And that's what I can appreciate. Sometimes, ranged weapons are useful for different scenarios moving forward, but in the following level, we get to experiment with our lightsaber. The lightsaber controls are pretty good. They aren't as flowy as later games, but they're efficient, controllable, and certainly useful. Well done, game designers. Like the first Dark Forces, I yearn for a remake. This level takes us to what is presumably a sewer system, but unlike a lot of games that have a dreaded sewer level, this level is fun like all the others. I think something else that I really like is how open the levels feel. While some may think that it's just a big empty field, I like it because it gives a lot of scope to the vastness of levels. I'm not exactly sure how powerful of a computer you needed for this game in the 90s, but this feels like a great technical achievement. This level has a lot of water in it, and many long drops. There's even a part where you need to go underwater and find a switch to elevate the water to progress. There's even this chasm, and it makes the level very daunting but in a good way. You're wanting to progress without falling, because falling down is very scary. It's environmental awareness in a game done perfectly. There's also a part with big jellyfish. While I suspect this might be nightmare fuel for some playing this back in the 90s, I wasn't very frightened by these enemies. They looked more like an organic mine than nightmare fuel. Eventually, Jan picks us up when we get to the end of the level. We go to the town of Baron's Head, guarded like a fortress by the Imperials. This is also around the time you can invest in force powers, the first of which in this level is force speed. Now, sequel fans aren't really the type to play old Star Wars games like this, but if one of them did, they'd probably look at this and think, wow, Kyle Katarn magically just got the Force without training. Rey isn't a Mary Sue after all. And my response to that would be,
wrong, sir. Wrong!
First of all, Kyle did get training in-universe by the ghost of Q-Ran. It just isn't heavily touched upon in the game, but it absolutely is in the novelization. Second, you are taking the gameplay and presentation too literally. Star Wars games before the Disney era did not take everything literally. Do you really think Starkiller performed all the feats in the game exactly like that? No, that was just spectacle for gameplay. The novelization for both The Force Unleashed and Dark Forces 2 showed us how the story happened through reasonable means. For example, Starkiller didn't actually defeat the motherfucking Emperor. He just feigned defeat before ambushing him. Starkiller, when he was pulling down the Star Destroyer, mostly relied on gravity as the Star Destroyer was going to collapse anyways. He just guided the direction of the landing with what he could with the Force. The Force wasn't even really unleashed in the novelization of the story. With that little tangent out of the way, you get the point. Kyle, like any other individual, got the required necessary training in his path to become a Jedi. The biggest highlight in this level includes a marketplace, which is full of civilians. Light side players have to be careful to not get anyone killed. There's so many civilians here that you have to be careful if you want the good ending. In the level after that, we face a bit of a problem, as pro-droid explosions caused my game to crash multiple times, and I was also low on health, so I had to be careful. I got the plasma repeater or whatever it was called, so I began to have an easier time once again. Eventually, we make it to the fortress, where we first encounter stormtroopers. Stormtroopers come in large numbers, but they're easily taken out if you know what you're doing. You should also avoid the ATSTs guarding the fortress. The entrance to the fortress is kind of convoluted and requires a lot of fast reflexes and force speed, so I hope you invested points into it. Eventually, you'll find your way to the top floors of the fortress. It's here where we get another cutscene. 88 gives Jarek the coordinates to the Valley of the Jedi, and Jarek tells him that his payment is waiting on one of his cargo ships in a refueling station outside of Baron's Head. It's here where we get our first boss battle. Kyle confronts 88, but Ewan, the youngest of the Dark Jedi, destroys the map to the valley and stuns Kyle, pulling out his yellow lightsaber. Keep in mind, all the Dark Jedi have different lightsaber colors. Also, whatever you do, please invest points into Force Jump as soon as you get it. Force Jump is so convenient and should not be skipped over. Ewan is relatively easy and reasonably beatable time span wise. There isn't much to say about him, except for his fate afterwards. Kyle spares him, and he is zapped out of the room. And then Kyle is ambushed by stormtroopers. Now it's time to escape. Now this is where Force Jump comes into play. You'll need to jump high places, and while I suspect it is possible to get places without it, Force Jump just makes things so much more simple and achievable. You gotta avoid a TIE bomber, and you also gotta jump across elevators, just like in Revenge of the Sith.
Always on the move.
Seriously, there just happens to be stuff in the older expanded universe works that closely resembles stuff in the prequel trilogy, before they were made. Also expect to come across the railgun or rocket launcher here. This level requires a lot of parkour. This level is sort of confusing to navigate, but I managed to figure it out in a reasonable amount of time. Now it's over to the refueling station. It's here where you'll get your hands on the concussion rifle, carried around by Trandoshans, and these guys have tougher skin, so be careful. There are also a lot of explosives and innocent monkey workers you have to be considerate of. When you enter the interior of the fuel station, you'll need to unlock the entrance to the fuel lines. This includes adjusting the fuel properly so you'll be able to enter. Once inside, the fuel is highly flammable, so be careful. This level is basically going across the fuel lines into the Imperial ship. Once there, we get the next level. On my first playthrough, I was really confused, but then it turns out I missed a switch I shouldn't have. Aside from that one bit, this level is pretty great. Mostly the same as all the previous levels minus the Yoon boss battle. Navigating is pretty simple compared to the other levels, and by now, you'll fully stock up on the entire weapon selection. This level takes around 10 to 15 minutes conventionally, if you know where you're going. Finally, Kyle catches up to 88 and pulls another one-liner that I'm surprised isn't a meme.
I finally get my chance to repay you.
But 88's head falls off. With the next boss fight, there's two alien dudes, one big and one small, igniting their lightsabers, intending to kill Kyle. And man, do I really wish I invested a point into Force Sense. The big guy's easy enough to take out, but the little guy both zips around like a motherfucker and uses the Force to make himself invisible, and the only way to repel it is with Force Sense. This boss battle is broken, and Force Sense literally has no use ever in the rest of the game. I was only able to beat the little guy by exploiting the game in a way where I could get multiple free hits on him, enough to kill him. After that, it's basically back out where you started. You need to escape the Imperial ship, and that includes a lot of platforming and also collecting key cards that are mandatory to progress. There's 3 keys you need to collect too, so it can get very annoying. But with that out of the way, that's the only real hindering obstacle in this level. Once we escape, we use 88's severed droid head to get the coordinates. With that, we've got our planet, Ruusan. At first I didn't realise the significance of all this, but after reading Darth Bane, I realised that the souls trapped in the Valley of the Jedi are the Jedi and Sith that were caught by the power of the thought bomb. Darth Bane, Rule of Two, describes their torment as painful for eternity, as all the souls feel the pain they did when the thought bomb went off. Hoth and Khan and their followers are trapped in the valley, damned for all eternity. Makes sense why Jarek is so interested in obtaining power with this insight. Makes the expanded universe very connected with stuff like this. Darth Bane, Rule of Two, is a discussion for another time, but I just wanted to point this out. Anyways, on Ruusan, it's time to take care of the Imperials that landed here. The level here is linear but expansive. There's both Imperials and natural fauna alike. You'll have to deactivate 3 switches in order to progress, and it's also around here where you'll get mostly useless Force powers. The only one that sort of works is Force Heal, but you can forget about the rest of them. Force Jump and Speed, those are the real powers. Making our way up to the platform, we are ambushed by Maw, a dude who was cut in half and can literally float. You hear that, TCW Maw? This guy didn't even need chicken legs. He just decided to float like Jesus. Anyways, the fight with Maw is the best in the game. He can hit pretty hard, but is reasonably defeatable, and also doesn't take forever to kill. There's 3 stages of the fight, which leads to a change in scenery on the map. Maw can be bested relatively quickly, and when that happens it leads to the next cutscene, and ultimately, Kyle's defining choice. Maw taunts Kyle by shaming his father, and Kyle kills him in anger, but this leaves him shaken. To make matters worse, Jarek and the remaining Dark Jedi show up with Jan captive, and Jarek orders Kyle strike Jan down and realize his potential in the dark side. Yeah. Depending on whether or not you've been a good boy and not killed any civilians, Kyle will do one of 2 things. In the light side endings, he will refuse to give in to the dark side, in which Jarek pushes him into the Imperial ship and causes it to collapse. In the dark side ending, Kyle gives in to the dark side, but doesn't care to be ordered around by Jarek, so he kills Jan, and Jarek utters the same line of dialogue. He does the same thing, and so the ending is basically 2 parallel paths with different reasons for doing so. From what I heard, the dark side ending was made late in development, so they couldn't change much. So they recycled a few levels and just changed a bunch of things. Most differences concern cutscenes, dialogue, and one of the bosses. But first, we must escape the ship. In the dark side ending, Q-Ran abandons Kyle, while in the light side ending, he continues to guide him. The escape is timed, so you need to escape fast enough, as not doing so will cause your death. You need to get to your ship that requires pushing 2 buttons in time. If successful, you will crash into a canyon on Ruusan. In the light side ending, which is infinitely more fleshed out, Bok destroys your lightsaber, and so you are left defenseless.
And it's gone.
Saris, who is actually in A New Hope through a retcon ironically, prepares to strike us down, but Yun saves us, exclaiming that a Jedi deserves a battle. In the light side ending, you will face off against Saris, while in the dark side ending, you will just fight Yun with no context. Both bosses are similar, except in the Saris boss fight, you will need to grab Yun's lightsaber, which is yellow, and that's what you will be fighting with for the rest of the game. Yeah, screw Rey Skywalker. Can't believe you, JJ. With either of those bosses killed, the following levels design-wise are pretty much the same, except you will either have access to light side or dark side powers. I don't have much to say about the following levels up until the final two bosses. They're mostly just more of the same. It's fighting enemies in the same planet and landscape. There are a few things that might stand out, like this blowing generator for example. A puzzle that is a requirement to access the Valley of the Jedi. But aside from that, it's more gunning down stormtroopers. The amount of people we've killed is ridiculous when you think about it. But then again, this is a game. Anyways, after that, it's Bok as the semi-final boss. This guy has a ridiculous advantage over you because he wields two lightsabers, both of them purple before Mace Windu. This is basically the game's way of making things harder. Not to mention he zips all over the fucking place, jumping around as much as the player would, so he's hard to hit. And damn does he just take forever to kill. You'll need to save consistently after getting a hit to beat him. I want to confess something. For the final two bosses, I used cheats to skip them. But, and this is a very big but, I have completed this game before. It's just that I couldn't be bothered fighting these two enemies all over again. I'm just going to say that Bok and Jarek are way too hard. Bok especially. I completely forgot the strategy required to beat Jarek, so I just skipped to the end. In the light side ending, Kyle resists the urge to strike Jarek down in anger. Jarek still tries a last resort hit, but Kyle takes him down. As Jarek is absorbed into the Force, Kyle proceeds to free the souls trapped in the Valley of the Jedi, and creates statues dedicated to Q-Ran and his late father. What a happy ending. I almost cried when the ending theme from the films played. What a nice way to wrap up the story. In the dark side ending, Kyle assumes control of Jarek's Imperial remnant and becomes the new Emperor as he destroys the final memory he has of his father. And that is Star Wars Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2. This game, aside from a few of the bosses, was great. Mechanics related to the Force can be broken, either because they don't work, or because they give you a ludicrous advantage. But aside from that, the game is extremely compelling. I can almost imagine how great this game would be potentially with a remake. Disney are pretty much cherry-picking Knights of the Old Republic only, and getting inexperienced studios to make it. I'd wish they'd have a little more common sense, and make remakes for the first two Jedi Knight games, plus the Mysteries of the Sith expansion. The live-action cutscenes had better performances than it had any right to be, and coupled with the classic Star Wars score, it leads to a whammy, and maybe sometimes underdeveloped, but still enjoyable story. Aside from a role-playing game, this might be one of the few examples of good video game stories in the 90s, as most games didn't even attempt a real story. They just gave you context for what you were doing. The levels in Dark Forces 1 are easily more identifiable, but Dark Forces 2 was way less confusing. I would say this is a definite improvement upon the original. While they haven't got the lightsaber combat exactly right just yet, I still feel this was an incredible experience. A surprisingly good story, great gameplay, improved level design, impressive graphics, and so much more. This game certainly deserved the acclaim it got back in the day. It may not be as playable today, but I seriously had a good time with it. It's no masterpiece, but it's a great, solid game that is definitely worth playing. Plus, it has significant lore relevance if you're into the Darth Bane storyline. Kyle Katarn certainly became a hero in his own right for freeing the tormented souls of the Valley of the Jedi, which is the canon ending to the game. While his story is not unique, the writers and game designers certainly utilized the Star Wars setting to their full advantage. This truly feels like a Star Wars game, adhering to George Lucas' saga and the spirit of it. I'm surprised that so many expanded universe works before the prequels could still be creative in their own right, and get Star Wars right in so many ways. The game's 25th anniversary is a very special occasion, and we should celebrate it while it's still fresh in our minds. I give this game an 8.7 out of 10, a bona fide classic that certainly earned the right for a remake. So with that being said, here are my patrons on screen. Sorry that it took a while for the new video to be made, but I've been working on a lot of projects equally. Tales of the Jedi by Dark Horse Comics is planned to be released 2 days before the Filoniverse knockoff version, and Death Troopers will be my Halloween special. Oh, and if you're going to ask about the multiplayer, believe me, I tried to get it to work, but I couldn't connect to any server. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories for mystery boxes? Happy 25th anniversary to the classic Dark Forces 2 expansion. When I last spoke about the Jedi Knight series, I spoke about the innovative, expansive sequel to Dark Forces. Looking at how they moved the series forward was super impressive. It turned from a Doom-like shooter into a massive game with open levels. It was truly incredible, and the game was released in the 90s. I was surprised how much Dark Forces 2 wowed me, despite the span of time. When I truly sat down to play it, it was an amazing experience. Not without a few problems like crashes, but still an impressive game. Just like the first game, it definitely deserves a remake. What I wanted to talk about next was the expansion to Dark Forces 2, titled Mysteries of the Sith. If you know me, you know that what are stories but mystery boxes? That's why Mysteries of the Sith drew me in from title alone. The Sith at this point of Star Wars history was a noteworthy faction in the expanded universe, and many would know Darth Vader was a Lord of the Sith, but it wasn't until The Phantom Menace until the mainstream knew what the Sith were as a whole. They appeared in stories like Tales of the Jedi, for example, but face it, before 1999, most people had no idea what the Sith were. Does this game elaborate on the Sith? Well, not really actually. It's the sort of game where the title is meant to contrast with the original game. The base game was referred to as Jedi Knight, so of course, it makes a lot more sense to make the expansion about the Sith somewhat. The expansion this time around stars not just Kyle Katarn, but also Mara Jade. Now, I've spoken about how so far I've been underwhelmed by Mara Jade. The only thing that she was in that I've read as of the recording of this video was the Thrawn trilogy. I've been told that she gets a lot of character development in a lot of the later novels, but I'm not at that point yet. I've also been told that this game takes place during the general events of Dark Empire, although that storyline is never referenced in this game. But the thing is, we know that Dark Empire was happening in unison with this given the timeline. With that being said, let's talk about it. Since Mara Jade is a playable character in this game, I suppose I was wrong about Cal Kestis being the first ginger protagonist in a Star Wars game. But regardless,
gingers have souls!
The game as an expansion pack does exactly what an expansion is supposed to do. For the most part, there's tweaks and improvements to every aspect of the Dark Forces 2 experience. It isn't a huge step up to the series like Jedi Outcast, so expect the relative same gameplay. Starting up the game, we're told in the opening title crawl, which again I miss heavily in Star Wars stories, that it's been 5 years since the Dark Jedi known as Jarek was defeated on Ruusan. Afterwards, Kyle Katarn has joined the New Republic, and continuing his pursuit as a Jedi. Accompanying him is, surprise surprise, Mara Jade, a smuggler who was once in Emperor's hand, swayed away from the path by Luke Skywalker. Mara Jade is training under Kyle to become a Jedi. I presume I missed a book when it comes to Mara's Jedi training, but regardless, let's talk about the game extensively now. The story isn't really the focus of the Mysteries of the Sith expansion. Despite its simplistic nature, I quite enjoyed the Dark Forces 2 story. It was a simple, straight-to-the-point game, full of the spirit that embodied the original trilogy, and following a bunch of the same tropes, with new characters of course. Here, the story doesn't really matter. If I had to describe the main focus, it would be the new levels and tweaks to the original game. To give you an idea, when we start the campaign, Kyle is training with Mara in a sparring match. Kyle, who sounds nothing like Jason Court from the last game, is replaced by the guy who was in the Spider-Man games for the PlayStation 1. That's quite an odd choice for Kyle Katarn. They nailed it when they got Jeff Bennett in Jedi Outcast and Jedi Academy, but here, I always thought that Reno Romano was way off when it came to Kyle Katarn, especially with the look and persona they set up definitively with Dark Forces 2. Now that I realize it, Kyle Katarn is literally the only returning character from the last game. Granted, most of the characters from Dark Forces 2 died. I mean, think about it. Kyle killed all 7 of the Dark Jedi, except for Ewan, but he still died anyways. The absence of Jan Ors is quite odd, but hey, it's not that big a deal. In the in-game animated cutscene, the frame rate is kind of iffy. I don't know what was going on there, but anyways, shortly after sparring, we get a disturbance. As always in a game, Kyle and Mara are called off to the command center, where the commander tells them that the Imperials are attacking the base. The Imperials have the element of surprise, due to disguising their weapon with an asteroid. So it's up to Kyle to repel the attack with the others at the New Republic outpost. And with that, the first level begins, in which we play as Kyle. The level opens, and it's pure chaos. It's got the same sort of vibe as the mission in the first Halo game. We're under attack, the situation is urgent, and here we are to potentially turn the tide of the battle. So let's get in. You'll notice right away that they definitely made improvements to the engine and how levels play out in many ways. For example, you've actually got allies in this mission, that being the New Republic soldiers, and the level feels more real due to more interactivity. I mean, it's still a 90s video game, and nowhere as complex as, say, Red Dead Redemption 2, but the improvements are felt. For this level, you'll be killing stormtroopers all across the base. They've invaded all over, and you'll immediately notice that the levels are a lot more closed in than Dark Forces 2. I noticed I was getting shot at right away, and wasn't able to dodge attacks. I somewhat suspected this game was made a lot harder than Dark Forces 2, on purpose. I mean, that makes sense in a way. The expansion should add new stuff to everything, and maybe give us more of a challenge as a follow-up expansion. What's good is that you have mostly efficient force powers. All the basics are back, especially force jump and speed, which you'll need to bunny hop and zip around like a motherfucker. The enemies are still tough if you're not careful. I observed that even when I was taking on stormtroopers in an open space, I was forced to run around, as deflection is highly inefficient. There's plenty of collectibles too at the start, but they all become obsolete as the game goes on, especially at the end. I wouldn't say the difficulty is brutally unfair. I understand why it's this challenging early on, but believe me, this game will kick your ass in the final set of levels. The AI allies, to be honest, are kind of useless, but what I can say at least is that they don't die easily, unless you kill them yourself. But a rebel committing the villain kills his own men cliché is practically unheard of. Anyways, across the first level, you'll be slashing at stormtroopers, but your guns will come in handy for ranged attacks. As I said, dodging is quite hard in the first level alone. We're even met with scout troopers, a new addition to the expansion that wasn't in the last game. We've got standard blaster troopers and rocket troopers too. I recall one of the rocket troopers kept firing at me, regardless on whether or not themselves or other troopers were in the way. That's commitment. Our objectives are to kill Imperials wherever we find them. At one point the power partially shuts off, so we have to find the generator and turn it back on. After that, we gotta take an Imperial shuttle and use it to sneak onto the weaponized asteroid. Level design here is not too confusing. I at one point struggled to find the vent at the start of the level, but aside from that, I had no problems otherwise. Collectible keys are back, but in the first level, it wasn't hard to find. I should also mention that the game completely adjusts the weapon selection by allowing you to pick up 2 weapons on the same key. What I mean is that you can switch between 2 kinds of blaster pistols by pressing 2, if you're going off the game's default keyboard controls. Anyways, we capture the Imperial shuttle, and Kyle takes it up to an asteroid to neutralize the whole thing. A simple, get in, self-destruct, get out plan. I like it. It's around this time you'll get zero help from allies. I mean, without them, you're still a one-man army. The second level, as I discovered, is pretty tough, and it takes some thinking to solve. When we land on the asteroid, there's really two ways we can go about it, and the most spelled out path is full of lethal enemies that will drain your health. If you're a fast runner, it is possible to take them out, but then after that I became stuck. The enemies are still pretty tough but defeatable. The first bit of problem solving is unlocking a small security station with an Imperial inside. You're supposed to shoot a switch inside to get the door open. I managed to figure it out relatively easily, but it's probable to say that some players may become completely confused. It wasn't a hassle to me, but it might be to some. The room gives you security access to security cameras all across the first part of the game. After that though, and after discovering hidden collectibles and loot, I just became completely stuck. Until I noticed that at a distance, the door I was supposed to proceed through was open, but long before you can even get close, the door closes immediately. I figured out eventually that I was supposed to shoot at a distance at the switch to force the door open. This only happened because I was observant. Since I didn't really know how the camera sniper worked, I just used the blaster at my side. Problem solved. After maybe half an hour of being confused. Fun fact, I actually managed to figure out every single puzzle and progression of levels on my own, except for the very, very end. We'll talk about that later. Nevertheless, after killing some enemies, we come across a deep chasm in the asteroid. You fall off and you die. One thing I love about these early 90s, early 2000s games is that most of them make falling off quite daunting. It may be an advantage of primitive graphics, but hey, childhood game trauma is a thing for a reason.
So uncivilized.
Anyways, this part isn't too hard actually, in terms of navigation that is. You won't know where to go that quickly, but not too slowly either. It's around this part of the level where you'll be introduced to the almighty turret, which you can get on and mop the floor with those dirty Imperials. It would make a better challenge to just organically take them all out, but I'm glad they gave you some sort of convenience at some points. To progress to the next area, you'll see a turret shooting at you. It's impractical to jump across because there's a ray shield. Essentially, the turret can shoot at you, but you can't shoot at it.
It just isn't fair.
I shortly after used my problem-solving skills to figure out that you're supposed to lure the turret to the angle where it's shooting at an explosive barrel near it, which will destroy the turret and the switch. Hard to think what would have happened if the switch wasn't canonically there. The rebel base would have been destroyed. I understand that canon in games back then was extremely loose, but sometimes I think about how game logic applies to how characters did certain things. Surprisingly, unlike Dark Forces 2, this expansion doesn't have a novelization, which would have explained things better. Figuring that part out, reinforcements show up after, in the form of a transport where some more stormtroopers shoot us. I assumed that I was supposed to jump on the transport and use it to lower myself down. When I got stuck on an elevator, I jumped down and clipped right through it. So at first I assumed it's just for show. But then sometime later, I tried it again when I was at similar elevation to the transport, and I didn't fall to my death. What? Imagine if someone went through the same thing as me, and they assumed you can't jump on the transport at all. They'd spend their time wasting it on finding a different solution. Elevating down, after we kill the stormtroopers, we are met with another cutscene of Kyle being pursued by stormtroopers. They manage to knock Kyle off with a rocket, and he falls down. They proceed to report that the intruder has been eliminated. As such, nobody goes looking for Kyle. Rule of thumb: always make sure that the target is dead, especially in a fictional story. This trope is quite common in everything. As a random example, when Syndrome thought that he killed Mr. Incredible after a scout drone did a brief scan. Well anyways, after the Imperials assume Kyle is dead, Kyle actually wakes up being unconscious for a bit, and spills one of his one-liners.
Gravity is a harsh mistress.
I was wondering how flat earthers explain gravity. Thanks for telling me, Kyle. The level is the sort where you need to figure out what to do. Basically, there's two directions you can go at the start, with a bunch of varying paths with the elevator and the like. There's classic locked doors and other stuff you'll easily miss. Like, for example, I didn't notice down this large elevator. I was supposed to hit a switch I didn't notice at all. While going over the footage, I was annoyed at myself that I didn't see it in my playthrough. One area, in fact, took a lucky guess to figure it out. There's also a part where you'll see an open door, but as soon as you approach it, it closes, and Kyle remarks that he needs to find another way inside. The thing is though, the game was actively teasing you. I usually don't like it in games when an easy path is blocked off after it originally seemed that you could access it. It's one of my top 5 worst video game tropes. I'd say Fallen Order is the worst offender, with it forcing you to get back up where you started on Dathomir, but one of the only things I dislike more is the trope where you have to defend something that can't defend itself, and has got a limited health bar. In a game, I usually want to take care of myself only, and not have stuff that forces you to manage all your effort in something that feels kinda pointless. Does Mysteries of the Sith have that? Thankfully not. I'm just demonstrating what I'm talking about. So with that being said, I don't have much more to say about this level. It's kinda confusing, but there's levels I disliked more in regards to level design. As such, let's talk about level 4. This is a level that requires fast reflexes and quick thinking. So across level 4 you'll be getting the asteroid to self-destruct. Before that though, we must traverse through areas that have every risk in the book. Deep falls, rocket troopers, etc. The game takes you everywhere, and require you to hop like a bunny. As such, you'll probably make it through more stormtroopers, before you realize you gotta go underwater. This mission in particular may actually be my favorite in the game. It's the perfect self-destruct sequence, at least in the 90s. When you go underwater, for example, you need to cut open some things so that the whole asteroid will initiate self-destruct. This is very trial and error. I doubt any player got it completely on the first playthrough blind. It's a good example of a good trial and error gameplay because it encourages you to realize your mistakes, and in each subsequent try, I made it further and further. You'll need to cut the cables to make the whole asteroid explode. Then you'll need to swim all across to this area, in which you need to pull 2 switches. When I got to this part, I wasted too much precious time and was forced to fix my mistake. I'm unsure how Kyle Katarn managed to survive such a complicated level like this, but eventually I made it out of the water and had to jump multiple times. There's a part where you need to pull 4 switches really fast, and by the time I successfully beat the level, I only had 2 seconds to spare, according to the automated voice. With that being said, Kyle escapes the asteroid in time. At the New Republic base, Kyle speaks to Mara, discussing that he discovered leads to the planet Droman Kars, a planet I hear was featured in the Old Republic MMO. I presume this is its first appearance, and after looking it up, yeah, it is. I'm thinking this is meant to contrast the Valley of the Jedi on Ruusan, except there's a lot less context. Mara objects to Kyle going to Droman Kars and leaving her at the base, because she insists that she needs more training. Man, did Rey Skywalker get everything easily. All she had to do was believe in the Force. I will never stop ridiculing J.J. Abrams for that. It's here where you realize that the story doesn't matter. At first, you'll be assuming that the Republic base and the Imperial asteroid was meant to get you invested in the story. Think back to Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, for example. That film's opening had very little to do with the rest of the film, aside from setting up one of the villains. But that film's opening is revered by all. I may or may not be teasing a certain review before the Dial of Destiny comes out, but that's a discussion for another time. Point is though, the story of Mysteries of the Sith doesn't matter. The game is pretty much companion missions that tell 3 separate stories. Act 1 of this game was about an attack on a Republic base and destroying an asteroid. So what's Act 2 about? Well, something less interesting. Mara Jade is told by the Republic base commander that they need supplies, and they want to make a deal with Kapar the Hutt. The cutscene has an awkward transition where it cuts right to Mara Jade going to Kapar's palace on whatever planet and talking to that eyeball thing from Return of the Jedi, in which she's told that since she's now a Jedi, and Luke as a Jedi killed Jabba, she can kindly piss off. Kapar ain't interested in speaking to her at all. Since this is fiction, Mara decides she's gonna need to find another way in, and so we transition to playing as Mara Jade. There are no more missions as Kyle Katarn. Scrap. Mara Jade of course has the same controls and moveset, being a player character. But the difference is that she has far less affinity in the Force. You'll quickly realize that Kyle was way more powerful and could pull off a lot more than Mara Jade could. It's here where you realize that it's going to become harder from that alone. But hey, we still got the Force. So what exactly is level 5 like? Well, after we're denied entrance, you have to locate a crack in one of the hills. Use the Force to jump up. Right from the offset, you'll come across Kapar's thugs and whatnot that carry different weapons from stormtroopers. In contrast with the last game, you were fighting thugs first and stormtroopers second. Anyways, you'll find that after jumping around that there's another way in, but the door's locked. Within a minute, I figured out that you were supposed to slash at the equipment so the mechanics would open the door to fix it. That's your ticket in. You see, it's stuff like this that isn't overtly hard to figure out what to do, that I wish earlier 90s video games did. So I applaud the game in this instance for coming up with a solvable problem that doesn't take you 5 hours to figure out. Regardless, that's your ticket in. The next area of the game is essentially what I think are living quarters. It's around here that it's not just bastards with bowcasters you have to deal with. You'll also need to fight grenade enemies, people who go up and personal, and normal blaster enemies. And it's not very easy to deflect or dodge fire in this game. Explosions usually go far enough where you'll be hit in one way or another. Grenade enemies are the most annoying. They can wipe away your health instantly. With that being said, after navigating the living quarters, which might look confusing, but is surprisingly simple, you'll come across another droid telling you to piss off. You can tell that that is the way to progress, so you are forced to get some kind of disguise or some way to trick the eyeball. So what you're supposed to do is locate a Tusken Raider disguise elsewhere and use that to trick the eyeball. This level so far is pretty cool with its problem solving. For most of the level, you'll be shooting all who stand between you and the hut. Sometimes the difficulty can be damn hard, but it feels like more of that trial and error gameplay I talked about. I had to scavenge for supplies and be selective and precise with enemy encounters. You'll also do some swimming and basically inching closer and closer to Kapar the Hutt. The puzzle solving is evident, but never did it become blatantly impossible or unfair. So thus far, level navigation and enemies are pretty decent. I like this expansion pack so far. The level ends by finding a pack of explosives and placing them on top of a dome directly above where Kapar hangs out in his palace. Overall, good level. But the navigation after this point becomes a hassle. Mara Jade barges into Kapar's throne room, and all is resolved when Kapar says he'll give supplies to the New Republic if Mara becomes his temporary errand girl and does a task for him. The Hutt's rival, some dude named Takara, has stolen some surveillance equipment from him, and he needs it back. Get it back and he'll supply the New Republic. Simple and easy. But first, you have to locate Takara's lieutenant. That takes you to a planet named Katrasi, in which you'll start off in a spaceport. A good improvement over Dark Forces 2 is not punishing you for killing civilians. There are a lot, and you can kill as many as you want without consequence. There is no light or dark side ending. It's just a rigid story, which is fine. Figuring out where to go and what to do is quite confusing. I think it has something to do with how many different areas there are, and progressing only happens properly when you search around. As a positive, what's cool about this level is provided you don't blow your cover with a lightsaber or whatever, stormtroopers will just ignore you. This doesn't mean, however, that thugs won't ambush you. They certainly will, and you'll be forced to deal with at least a dozen of them. Among your objectives is switching off something in one of the hangars, and with this level, I honestly lost track. Going over the footage really did not refresh my memory, because it took me a long time in my original playthrough to figure out where the hell to go. It's here where the game becomes confusing to navigate, which is a shame, because the game was damn good so far, and I didn't encounter much problems, aside from rough difficulty. I also remember going into a cantina, but getting lost for a while after that. Eventually though, you'll gain entrance to the next level through means I can't remember. And now we're on to a familiar looking, but more straightforward level. That doesn't mean there's no confusing navigation, because there certainly is. Anyways, with that brief summary, let's get on to the next level. In the next level, you'll have a relatively simple time with navigation for at least the first 5 minutes of playing, but eventually, you get stuck. Since there's some sort of crash land speeder blocking the way, you'll need to find another way around. So what do? That's what I asked myself for at least half an hour, before I realized I missed a vent hidden behind a slope. It's so slight though, that I wonder how the hell I was supposed to know it was there. I think the slope should have been removed, so that more players would be able to see it. That's my criticism for this part of the level. After you figure out the way, you're on to the other side of this level, and you also have to deal with stormtroopers too. One area is basically a war zone. The stormtroopers with their rocket launchers and the Trandoshan thugs with their concussion rifles. It's a nightmare. Like, I know the Empire probably doesn't care about civilian casualties, but what about collateral damage? I'd also like to mention there's a neat Easter egg where we see the Millennium Falcon. Since this takes place the same year as Dark Empire, maybe this is where the Falcon was before Dark Empire. I have no idea what Han, Leia, and Chewie were doing on Catrasi, but I guess it doesn't matter. There's a bit of problem solving around this area that isn't too hard, like activating a land speeder to use as an elevator to jump up, where it'll take you to the rooftops. This takes you to the final area, and damn do they spam the enemies all over, don't they? Like, there's this one part after getting a key, you'll open a door, and whoa, concussion blasts in your face and you're dead. There's no way to dodge that. It's a beginner's trap. After that, though, you fall into a trap and you're captured, where you wake up in the most filthiest, most unsanitary prison cell. You're stuck. You're trapped. So how do you escape? You use force pull to grab the key from a Gamorrean guard. This took me around 2 minutes to figure out. Since you have no weapons, getting your weapons back is a hassle, because you'll need to avoid Gamorrean guards, and also other prisoners. I have been told that the prisoners can be used as a distraction to attack the guards, but since they attack you too, I found little use with them. Basically, you'll need some tools to open up a water pipe. You want to know where this leads? No, seriously, I'll let you have a guess. It's a giant Rancor, of course. It's here where you'll force pull your lightsaber towards you. But if you try to attack the Rancor, odds are that you'll just get eaten, and there's no way to break free. I had to exploit the game to get free hits on him, until he finally died. Then you're allowed access to the next area. But seriously, how was the average player in the 90s supposed to get past this? After this, you basically have to get some shenanigans in what looks like a sci-fi sea dock. It's here where you'll steal the surveillance equipment in question, and then you can finally escape the area. Then it's the start of the next story in the game. Basically, we're on a New Republic ship and we're escorting a Jedi holocron. But of course, some pirates have to show up in an attempt to board us, starting the next level. With that being said, it's a pretty impressive level. The set pieces are excellent. It's a very creative level. It's basically a more primitive version of the Pillar of Autumn or Cairo Station from the Halo games. I always enjoy boarding action in games. Your allies though are pretty useless. Noteworthy parts of this level include a bridge that you're supposed to cut the beams for, but I didn't realize that, so I wasted 15 minutes before I thought of that. Aside from that, my favorite part of the level has to be fighting pirates with zero gravity. That was a lot of fun, but it's near the end of the damn level. We hide inside a crate and use that to sneak on board the pirate ship. But damn was this one of the most confusing out of all the levels. Like seriously, at my most confused, it took me what felt like an hour. Although it was only 15 minutes to figure out that I was supposed to destroy something to get a door open. I was damn near close to giving up though. After taking a ship to the pirate base, I got to say, this might be one of the most visually appealing levels in the game. The level was expansive, yet not confusing, with a lot of puzzle-solving challenges, including jumping across large boxes that appear out of water in this area, and having to jump across to progress. And if you screw up, you gotta do it all over again. It's here where you'll come across Easter eggs from the previous games, like the Dark Trooper helmet and AT-88, before we steal the holocron and make our grand escape, which is pretty fun. I opted to use force speed to zip past the enemies and find our transport and escape. with that being said, we're on to the third act. Mon Mothma contacts Mara Jade and tells us that Kyle's gone missing and he's out of contact. So Mara Jade goes to Dromund Kaas to find him. So the title of the game is coming full circle, except there's no mystery to be solved. Almost like JJ's mystery box. The box is going to have to be opened eventually. So basically, we land on this random swamp on said planet. You'll realize right away that none of your external weapons work, which makes the game extraordinarily harder. For most of the game, relying on ranged weapons was sort of part of the gameplay, but now that it's gone, you've only got your lightsaber. This area is supposed to be the super ancient and mysterious place, but making the weapons short out was a mistake. You have to rely on external weapons in certain situations, but now that it's gone, I spent the first 15 minutes figuring out how to get past the statue. I at first assumed that you had to jump up across branches, but nope, that does nothing. And if you fall down, you die, as always. After wasting a lot of my time, I realized you were supposed to trick the statue by using force persuasion to make yourself invisible and allow yourself to pass. But if you thought it was going to get any simpler, the nightmare has only just begun. You'll come across so many enemies that drain your damn health like a motherfucker. I was forced to use quick save to pick off the enemies one by one, which I hate when I have to do that. After the enemies are wiped away, you're faced with more puzzles. Figuring out was near impossible, but somehow I did, and you come face to face with a dark version of Mara Jade. It's supposed to be some spooky dark half of yourself. I presume this planet has the same effect the Dagobah cave has. Defeating the dark half of yourself is a bitch. You have to jump around, dodge the lightning, and other stuff in general, but eventually you'll come across the temple to progress. Yes, based on what we described, that's only the beginning. The only way I could survive between areas was by hiding or by claiming the high ground. Another thing to note is that force heal is slow to recharge, so you'll have to wait like 30 seconds or something to use it again. It's ridiculous. It would be nice to have blasters, but that would even out the difficulty. But of course, this game at this stage does not hesitate, nor does it show any mercy or forgiveness. The game became pretty frustrating in the climax. Being at a major disadvantage by removing external weapons, again, made the game artificially harder. This level is enemy after enemy, all of which drain your health in 2 seconds. Eventually, you come across Kyle, who has fallen to the dark side, and we must pursue him. The difficulty goes totally off the rails if it hadn't already, by barraging you with even more enemies, and involving even more complicated puzzles. Seriously, don't you think it was already hard enough? I was forced to pretty much avoid all the enemies, or use alternate tactics like hiding or the high ground. Again, to keep myself alive. Eventually we come across Kyle, and he offers us a choice, but again, since this game only has one ending, Mara of course refuses. It would be kind of cool if you could choose, but hey, it didn't necessarily need it. And here we come across the toughest boss fight that can be defeated in an easy way, but not a way the game tells you. You want to know something about this boss fight? I spent an hour straight trying to defeat Kyle, but he just kept healing myself. I forced myself to hide and strike at him over and over again, and he never came anywhere close to dying. To be fair, the game does give some sort of clue on what you're supposed to do by showing a figure on the wall with a deactivated lightsaber, but most players would only assume that's for decoration. Basically what you're supposed to do is deactivate your lightsaber, something you would only figure out if you accidentally hit the button, because you've relied on your lightsaber the whole playthrough and never had to change it. How was anyone supposed to figure that out though? Anyways, Kyle realizes he can't strike Mara down, so they leave together on the ship. That ending was sort of underwhelming, but since the story isn't a focus, I guess that brings us to the conclusion. As an expansion, it isn't as long or fulfilling as Dark Forces 2. It strips away a compelling story, but in return we get an improved engine that allows for more opportunities and levels. As such, it's a decent expansion. An easy 7 out of 10. But what holds it back are of course confusing level design and hard enemies, especially at the end. I can forgive most other encounters because at least they give you more weapons at your disposal, but removing usable weapons was a mistake. Despite that, Mysteries of the Sith is a fun time if you were a fan of Dark Forces 2. If not, you should probably skip this game. It kinda sucks that there was a lacking story, and it's basically just side quests, but as an expansion, that's mostly forgivable. I still yearn for a remake of both Dark Forces games plus the Mysteries of the Sith expansion. Maybe there that we can get said problem solved. I'm happy to recommend Mysteries of the Sith, but be aware that it's a cautious recommend. If you don't like confusing levels or insane difficulty, Mysteries of the Sith may not be for you. But I still think it's worth celebrating the game's 25th anniversary. Now, before I close this video, I should address the secret level that's hidden in the game. It's a level that recreates Episode 5's climax on Cloud City. Honestly, just like the multiplayer, I didn't actually play it. Why? Well, I kinda felt like I was done with the game after Dromund Kaas gave me so much shit. I might cover the multiplayer if there's enough demand for it, and I'll be sure to talk about the Bespin bonus level. Or maybe it'll be a YouTube short. I have heard the game was somewhat rushed, but regardless, Star Wars Jedi Knight Mysteries of the Sith is a decent expansion that despite its lacking story, its plot points were used for the Old Republic MMO at least. That is my complete review on Mysteries of the Sith. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories about mystery boxes? Hello there, I'm the serial plagiarist, and just like Philip Mewson, remember him, was an outcast from journalism after he was caught stealing from multiple outlets, and content creators in good old-fashioned plagiarism, the namesake of my channel, Kyle Katarn became an outcast in the Jedi ways. You might be arguing that Jedi Outcast is actually referring to the main villain, but when you think about it, it may actually be referring to both of them in a symbolic kind of way. It's like poetry. It rhymes. But still, this is the most unclear title in the series. And speaking of which, the series completely changed its title. It went from Dark Forces to Jedi Knight over the years. So despite what this game is officially labeled, its correct title is Star Wars Dark Forces 3, Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast. But with that out of the way, this game is a classic just like all the others. It massively improved on its predecessor, just like Dark Forces 2 improved on Dark Forces. If there was ever a series that innovated and improved with every game, the Jedi Knight series would be it. I'm more lax towards Mysteries of the Sith and Jedi Academy because they're both spin-offs, but they still improved on the successful formula. As such, there isn't a single bad game in this sub-series. Jedi Outcast in particular continues this trend. Jedi Outcast was developed by a third party this time around, Raven Software, which is a studio that nowadays has been sucked into the Call of Duty money machine. Jedi Outcast ironically runs on the Quake 3 engine, which was also the basis for the Call of Duty series. So essentially they all form a symbiote circle, going back to the same engine. The engine is also known as id Tech 3, so we're 4 engines behind when it comes to this game. Still, this engine was capable of a lot back in its day. It's still the original basis for Call of Duty, even if it's been heavily modified since then for modern releases. Jedi Outcast, despite the change in developers, still has the same core identity from the previous games. It's like we didn't even transition developers, and that's impressive for a switch of developers. Usually when franchises change developers, its identity changes as well. A key reason the Hitman series, for example, maintain the same identity is because it was made by the very same development team as the first one, up until Hitman 3. So this game was definitely put in meaningful hands. Also, this is the first in the series where we had a story unhindered by technology. For what it was, Dark Forces 2 had a great story by the standards of its time. A very simple story akin to the original trilogy of finding your destiny, avenging your father, and becoming a Jedi. It was impressive, and the presentation was fairly simple. Cutscenes that move the story along, which is a very traditional way of telling a video game story. Since this is the era where video game stories were fully achievable in a shooter, Jedi Outcast takes it to its full advantage. Kyle Katarn in particular remains the same classic Star Wars video game hero we all know. Jason Court's likeness was used for the character since Dark Forces 2, and I gotta say that when it comes to Jedi Outcast and Academy, Jeff Bennett was a brilliant choice. While he is more gruff sounding than Jason Court and Reno Romano, he embodies the persona that Jason Court's persona had. Besides, we needed a definitive voice actor by now. If there's any voice work that should be done for Kyle Katarn, I'd give Jeff Bennett a call, if he's still around. Okay, yeah, he's still active. I also recognize Jeff using the same voice for Ultra Magnus in Transformers Animated. Also, I want to mention how he and Reno Romano both did male Revan in KOTOR and the Old Republic MMO respectively. So without further ado, let's get into Jedi Outcast and experience one of the best lightsaber fighting simulators that not even the modern games can replicate. Starting a new game, we get what you'd expect from a real Star Wars story. A title crawl. This time, it's been 8 years since the Battle of Endor, so around 2 years after Dark Empire. The New Republic still has to clean up Imperial factions that refuse to admit defeat. Kyle Katarn, meanwhile, after defeating Jarek and the Dark Jedi, has given up the Force because the dark side is a bitch. Based on what we've seen the whole series, Kyle does have a loose allegiance to the light side, and tempts himself to falling a lot. I inferred that Kyle gave up the Force because of the events of Mysteries of the Sith, but apparently there was a lot of other stuff that happened. But I haven't gotten into any specific books that explores that stuff. So for now, let's assume it's because of Mysteries of the Sith. Anyways, Kyle has returned to his mercenary ways with his partner Jan Ors, and is on a mission to a seemingly abandoned Imperial outpost on the planet Kejim. One criticism that I do have is that the pre-rendered cutscenes are really fuzzy and lesser quality than cutscenes that use in-game assets. So some better quality cutscenes would have been nice. Anyhow, to start the story, we've got Kyle and Jan in their replacement to the Moldy Crow, the Raven's Claw, and basically having a chat. The graphics at that are a bit dated, especially in regards to a lot of character models such as the first two that we see, Kyle and Jan. Jan, when you look closely, has a weird face, and Kyle, if he wasn't from Star Wars, probably looks like a redneck hermit cannibal out of context. I suppose the engine wasn't really built for graphics. After all, most of the models in Quake would have been evil monsters or guys with helmets. Anyways, both Kyle and Jan are contacted by Mon Mothma, who gives them a partially decoded transmission from Imperial forces on Kejim. Among the words spoken are the words Reborn and Valley of the Jedi. So we're starting off with a mystery plot, are we?
Well, what are stories but mystery boxes?
This turns what would be a pretty stale job into something more sinister. Kyle and Jan were the only survivors from the Valley of the Jedi, and are the only people who know where it is. Oh, sorry. Ouija knows where it is too, but we don't see that stubby little droid for the rest of the series. So where the fuck he is up to the players to decide. Man, would that make the perfect Disney Plus series? But again, Disney always foils the good ideas. Instead, we get sad excuses for series like Andor and Kenobi among others. Anyways, turns out this mission is more than meets the eye. This is a small nitpick, but when the cutscene ends, we cut straight to the level in an awkward transition. It's actually one of the few times in the game this happens. First we were in space, and boom, now we're at the outpost. We've got Jan as our only ally. When the level starts, you have the relative element of surprise. But look here, I tried to line up a shot with my Briar Blaster pistol, and the stormtrooper dodges it. Damn, this random trooper has fast reflexes. He should be on the dodgeball team. You know, something I like doing is coming up with random backstories for enemies you come across in the game, since we're free to come up with our own headcanon. So this trooper that dodged a shot is called Dodgy. He's from the planet Dodge Tatooine and was an expert holo dodgeball player at school, revered for his fast-ass reflexes. He later joined the Empire and became a stormtrooper to provide for his wife and children, to which he was stationed on Kejim in the later years of the Galactic Civil War. Based on the conversation we can overhear, he was planning on retiring a few days later, But of course, Kyle Katarn was there to ruin everything and ambushed him before blasting him off a ledge, and his body was never recovered. He was essentially KIA. Also, the dude he was talking with was his best friend Generico, who was killed afterwards. Then we killed his commanding officer and the rest of his unit. So yeah, anyways, we storm across the front entrance and killing stormtroopers. Jedi Outcast is a less generous game than the previous games, as it doesn't allow for auto-aim. And the aiming is a little floaty and inaccurate, but it ain't no Fallout 3 or New Vegas. Seriously, those two games had the worst shooting I've ever seen. To be fair though, in the early game, it doesn't make things frustrating. The floaty gunplay, despite setting back the gunplay, didn't make it unenjoyable. In fact, gunning down stormtroopers is still quite satisfying. I think this can mostly be attributed to the sound effects and death animations. Seriously, Jedi Outcast and Jedi Academy may have some of my favorite animations out of all the Star Wars games I played. It's also a good thing that it's not a straight up ragdoll. In the early game, it's just you with a gun, and for a melee option, you've got the stun baton, which does less than ideal damage. The stun baton is usually there as a last resort and is not an effective weapon in the slightest. Trust me, the lightsaber is far better. But just like Dark Forces 2, you gotta work for the damn thing. Also, you have to be pretty careful about how you navigate, because you typically will not survive a jump from too great a height. And believe me, this game is pretty tricky with the heights. Even when you're on the first damn level, there's multiple times where you could fall from too great a height and straight to your death. Basically, we activate a turret to get the door open. Pretty simple. Immediately after that, we go down an elevator where we're locked out of the rest of the base. Some players get confused right about here, but when it comes to me, I actually found it easy. I immediately thought of the outside-the-box solution that was going underneath the elevator and shooting this electrical tank thing, getting out of the way when it bursts into flames towards you, and use it to sneak into one of the computer rooms or whatever it's supposed to be in the outpost. I open the door, and Jan stays around this area to scan the terminal and see what we can uncover. Around the base, navigation is pretty experimental and requires thinking outside the box. The main objective from here is to put in a 3-part code to access the next main area of the base. As such, they'll have their own ways of being accessed. The blue code is accessed by going down an elevator into a dark storage room. You'll need light binoculars to navigate effectively, which can be collected all across levels. This will take you to the code, which is surrounded by Imperials to gun down. Thankfully, when you see the code, you don't need to memorize it, as it's saved on your datapad that you could always turn to for objectives. It is kind of a shame that they also didn't include a map screen, because I occasionally got lost, so that may be another criticism. Anyways, to access the green code, you will need to wipe out all the stormtroopers, eventually coming across the terminal. Kyle contacts Jan to slice through the terminal, and so you're required to go back to her. But they give a sense of urgency by having her be pinned down. Fun fact, Jan is voiced by Vanessa Marshall, who also voiced Hera Syndulla in Rebels. You escort Jan back to the computer, and she unlocks the room with the green code in it. Lastly, to get to the red code, you need to travel through a tunnel that explodes behind you, and you gotta find your way back. As such, we are required to fight through Imperial probe droids, who make the same creepy sound effects. In video game terms, it works quite effectively, not to mention the thing flies around and almost killed me given I didn't have a lot of room to maneuver without falling to my death. I also almost died getting near the red code, as there's so many stormtroopers who mop the floor with me. You also need to turn on the computer that inputs the codes. After that, you put in the codes and get access to the next level. So overall, a solid starting level, full of variety, fast shooting, and creative set pieces. And if I have to praise this game for anything, it's the set pieces. The set pieces are perhaps the best I've seen in a Star Wars game, aside from Jedi Academy. In the next level, you gun down more stormtroopers, no duh, but you also get very creative rooms and areas throughout this level. For example, early on, you come across a room that's freezing cold. You find a switch to cool the room down, in which you'll melt all the ice cream. On top of that, you'll come across a bunch of turrets and probe enemies. Turret enemies require you to be out of line or running around to avoid their rapid fire. But aside from that, they aren't too hard. They're a hazard that stops you in your tracks, but you'll be able to get your ass moving soon after you take them out. There's also this room that reminds me of the box from the Clone Wars because of the moving platforms, which in itself was based on a movie called Cube. Also, make sure you don't shoot at a bad angle when it comes to these red shield generators, otherwise... After that, you're supposed to go through a pipe and shoot more Imperials. This is really the level that is filled with turrets you have to dodge. Fortunately, at least on the difficulty I played on, which was Jedi, you have enough back to pickups in the early game. Except for this part where I ran out, and if someone shot me, it would have been a one-hit death. To further add insult to injury, they had a rapid fire turret, which forces you to get into cover. You also got to make sure the support troopers don't hit you either. This is probably the most unfair part in this level, but after that it was fine. I eventually turn on the switch, and the whole room goes nuts after the center starts spewing laser beams. If you touch the laser beams, it's an instant death. So you gotta reenact all the spy films you watched growing up, and damn it! Anyways, after that, we get a set piece where you control a mouse droid to make the next room safe to enter, since those darn Imperials made the room too dangerous from their experiment gone wrong. You mop up the remaining stormtroopers, and then we've completed the level. Kyle opts to grab some of the crystals from the outpost, but we get that thing in movies where we were being watched the whole time. Spying on us was Gallic Fire, who works for a mysterious dark Jedi, Dasan. He informs Dasan that Katarn and his partner infiltrated their little outpost and killed everyone in there, except for Bob the Builder, who was a freelance carpenter, who hid from Kyle and Jan while they were killing everyone. Only question now, the damage and loss of life, can he fix it? Okay, I made that up. Anyways, back on Coruscant, Kyle and Jan find some clues about what the Imperial Remnant were doing. They seem to be harvesting these crystals, similar to what a Jedi has in their lightsaber. Kyle Katarn doesn't like working with the Force anymore, but Mon Mothma offers the both of them a double paycheck, and Jan takes the offer. So Kyle has to go along with it. This probably isn't everything, but I like how Kyle in this cutscene has a gut feeling that this is going to turn out to be something that would have gotten him into trouble, if not for Jan accepting the job. If you played this game, you know what I'm talking about. This is the butterfly effect at its extreme. I don't know, it's something I observed. Anyways, the crystals come from a mining colony named Artus Prime, so it's likely the Empire has taken over the planet. As always, Kyle and Jan go to the planet to do their thing. Apparently, Jan always gets the easier job of flying the Raven's Claw, while Kyle has to run a gun.
It just isn't fair.
It's a shame you never get to fly the Raven's Claw in the whole series. That would have been nice. Another advancement Jedi Outcast makes from previous games is having a stealth system. It's very primitive, but it's there. You need to get inside the outpost without being detected. It's also around here that you pick up a Wookiee bowcaster. The bowcaster is one of my least used weapons in the game. It packs a punch, sure, but there's other better weapons. Plus it's hard to hit your mark. There's this mostly useless feature that allows you to spread 5 shots, but good luck hitting anyone with those 4 extra shots. Around this level, you'll be blasting stormtroopers just like the last 2 levels. But damn, there are a lot of them. There was this one part where I saw the stormtroopers from above, so I tried throwing a thermal detonator, but it ricocheted off the wall and was forced to run away. The grenades aren't useless, however, as I used one to wipe out 2 stormtroopers and crippling 2 others who died in one hit. You'll need to do some pretty tricky jumps to get into the mines, but before that, I was overwhelmed by so many bucket heads. When we get into the mines, you gotta deal with these critters. This is around the time I opted to use my stun baton. These pests aren't that dangerous, but still. Eventually, we get to this generator, destroy it, and then we take a damn tram over to the next level. The next level has you climb the everlasting staircase, and it's here where you free the colonists. As well as this, there's even a part where you corner an Imperial officer and hold him at gunpoint. He thankfully isn't a drawn-out escort. You escort him long enough for it to not get tedious. It's around 2 minutes. Now I wanted to talk about the last level before you get your force powers. And it also happens to be one of my favorite levels. It starts with urgency, as we need to get into a turret to protect the colonists, who are holding off Imperial forces. you blast them all, and this is actually a turret section that isn't tedious. Your turret feels all-powerful, and can even take down an ATST. Damn, this turret is well armed. After the colonists are safe, we proceed to hike across the area, avoiding being squished by an ATST. Right here, we avoid obstacles like an electric floor, destroying cannons, and other stuff that feels very high tension. Seriously, this is a highlight in the game. Even though I'm replaying this game, I was greatly anticipating the end sequence. After we've completed all of our objectives, Jan contacts us, but she's apprehended by an unknown entity. Going to her location, we get introduced to the main villain and his apprentice. Based on appearance and presentation on a first playthrough, Dasan looks pretty imposing. It's also helped by his unnaturally hard-ass voice. I'm not sure how to describe it. On a first playthrough, I started sweating, because I knew this would not end well. Kyle confronts this guy, and the two exchange insults based on appearance. And with Jan captured, Kyle prepares to take on this lizard boy. It's you with a blaster versus him with a lightsaber. And the Force! Dasan during this boss fight, shall we call it, will kick your ass. Shooting him is useless given he'll just deflect, and using a stun baton also won't work because he'll just push you away. I have to compliment this game for making Dasan's fighting feel exactly like he's toying around with you. I know that might not feel like much, but remember that this game was released in 2002, so having AI be like that is commendable. So yeah, you lose this fight. You're loser. Dasan strangles Katarn with the Force, calling him absolutely pathetic as someone without the Force. It's like Kreia said, take the greatest Jedi Knight, strip away the Force, and what remains? This quote is so true here. Dasan remarks about testing out his skills on Jan. Kyle spats back that he better not touch her. That's where Dasan has the most brilliant evil idea. He tells his apprentice Tavion to kill Jan. Tavion proceeds to cut down Jan off screen, and Kyle is absolutely furious as Dasan throws him away like tinfoil and takes off in his ship. The now livid Kyle Katarn remarks,
You want a worthy adversary? I'll give you a worthy adversary.
Yeah, that's right. We're gonna use the Force again and take our revenge, just like Steve in that Minecraft music video. Kyle goes straight to the Valley of the Jedi on Ruusan. He observes the valley for a brief moment until a certain someone speaks to him. His father, Morgan Katarn. Okay? I gotta criticize the game for making me confused. Where did a character like him learn to preserve his consciousness after death? Was he Force sensitive too or something? According to Wikipedia, he was. And apparently, he appeared as a ghost to Luke Skywalker too. So I'm probably gonna have to read the Jedi Knight novels. Point is though, it's not really explained to the average player. I'm just saying that maybe it would have made more sense for someone who doesn't read the books to have Q-Ron be the one who speaks to Carl about all this. We've seen him as a Force ghost in Dark Forces 2. Also, I noticed that we're going for another revenge story. In Dark Forces 2, Jarek killed Carl's father. Now, we've got Dasan and his apprentice who killed Carl's partner. Is this revenge story different in any way? Well, I mean, yes actually, but I'd have to spoil the rest of the game. So we'll wait until we get to certain parts of the game. Carl's father makes him think about his decision to reconnect himself to the Force. Despite conquering his battle with the dark side when fighting Jarek, Kyle may almost fall into that trap again. Kyle ultimately decides to use the Valley of the Jedi as a shortcut to regaining his connection to the Force. There's a small detail where Kyle is taken back, because he forgot what the Force felt like, but now he's got the Force again. He's going to look for Dasan, but first, he's going to need to get his lightsaber back. So his next stop is the Jedi Academy on Yavin 4. We also get a cutscene in between that reveals that Dasan followed us to the valley, presumably through a tracking beacon. So Dasan is ready to empower as many people as he can. Uh-oh, but we don't have a lot of time to think about that. We go to the Jedi Academy on Yavin 4, where we can explore around a bit. There isn't any combat whatsoever. There's this room where we can see two students doing lightsaber practice, and you can watch. It's a small bit, but it makes you feel right at home essentially. But this ain't where we're supposed to go. We're supposed to go and meet the one, the only, Luke Skywalker. And unlike The Last Jedi, he acts how you'd expect. Man, someone should make a parody of Jake Skywalker in the post-Return of the Jedi expanded universe. But anyways, Kyle speaks to Luke about getting his lightsaber back. He of course explains that Jan's been killed by a Dark Jedi, and Luke knows immediately who this Dark Jedi is. Dasan. Luke explains that Dasan was a student at his Jedi Academy, coming from some dirt poor world. Not exactly North Korea, but it might as well be that. Surprisingly enough, Dasan isn't focused on much in terms of backstory besides this one exchange. There's a lot left up to interpretation. I did somewhat wonder if we could have gotten more on Dasan and built him up as a character, because as it stands, Dasan is the weakest main villain so far. Rom Mok was a good antagonist, and Jarek was an excellent one. So I'm going to have to say here that Dasan is not exactly a very memorable villain. He's a one-off character, with not much potential to expand in anything else. In the scale of things, it doesn't really matter, but Rom Mok and Jarek are villains I'd actually like to see more of, in stories that predate their appearances in their respective games, given they die in them. Dasan, aside from appearance and voice, doesn't leave much of an impression. He's evil because he's evil. Luke explains in a small amount of detail that Dasan became more and more argumentative and aggressive when he got to the temple, and he killed an unspecified student in cold blood, then fled before he could be counseled. And believe me when I say that's all we get. Given Kyle and Dasan in a way are two sides of the same coin thematically, it was a missed opportunity not getting into Dasan more. They're both essentially Jedi outcasts, just in the opposite ways. But anyways, aside from this, Kyle Katarn has to go through a test. Kyle asks Luke why they can't just do things the simple way, and Luke responds,
"If the ways of the Jedi were easy, there'd be millions of us instead of dozens."
That might be a passing line of dialogue, but it's pretty meaningful in terms of channeling the light side and being a Jedi. Luke still tells Kyle that he has to retrieve his lightsaber through a Force test, while he tracks Dasan's whereabouts. So we go get our lightsaber in a ruined temple adjacent to the Academy. We go over there, and this is where we get our Force powers. They're all power-ups that give us the abilities. The base Force powers include push, pull, jump, and speed. All the essentials we saw in the prequel trilogy, and powers that are mandatory for a game like this. You'll be solving puzzles, none of which are too hard, nor do they make your brain go numb. They actually just test out your Force skills. I've probably said this before, but I'll say it again. I hate crippling puzzles. The hardest time I had with Fallen Order was when there were a bunch of elaborate puzzles that I much disliked. I had to look up how to solve them. I first played Jedi Outcast, I'd say around 2012 or 2013, when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old. I was born in 2003. Jedi Outcast was kind of confusing with its level design, and I had to look up what the hell I was supposed to do, even back then. That's not much of a problem now, but back then, I found things tedious in terms of level design. This level I'd say I had one big problem with, and that's retrieving your lightsaber. The rest of the level's puzzles are simple, but I didn't realize you needed to use Force Pull to grab the lightsaber before the cage closes. Back then, I was used to super straightforward levels. Maybe it was my fault for not using my problem-solving skills, but then again, I was still relying on my mum to tie my shoes, because I was that kid who found tying his shoes super hard, and it took me years to figure out how to do it on my own. Even then, I'm still not good at it, but at least I know how to do it somewhat. Anyways, our ultimate goal is the lightsaber, which will become any player's favourite weapon for the rest of the game. So with that being said, Luke Skywalker greets us when we finish the test. He tells us that our best lead on Dasan was his ship, whose registry was tied to a gang lord named Relo Baruch. Kyle responds that he knows about Relo. He claims to be an honest garbage hauler, but he's the worst of the worst on Nar Shaddaa, and not even the Hutts will touch him. So yeah, we might not go straight after Dasan, but we've got a lead. One of my colleagues criticized the game for making us go on a detour, but this does tie into the main story in us following Dasan. It's sort of the trope where we start small and build our way up. Anyways, we also get a discussion between Kyle and Luke. Luke actually expresses surprise that Kyle passed the test with flying colors. Given the length of time he went without the Force, he expected him to fail outright, but pieces together that he's been to the Valley of the Jedi. This is where Luke has a serious discussion with Kyle. Luke tries to warn Kyle about falling to the dark side. If he doesn't let go of his anger, it will destroy him. It's the classic speech about not falling to the dark side, but it works really well. Kyle says that he doesn't know if he can keep himself under control, but does decide to give Luke the location of the Valley of the Jedi just in case. So to describe this whole sequence, it's a great way to get your lightsaber. And with that being said, we head over to Nar Shaddaa, the Smuggler's Moon. I like the sequence at the start of the level. We don't get to use any of our force powers yet, and we walk into a bar, handing over our weapons. Except for, of course, the lightsaber. There's a surprising lot of interactivity, from briefly speaking to people at tables, to even watching a match between two critters. We even get dialogue if we try to go through an out of bounds area. This all could have been a cutscene, but I like the small touches. We trigger the important stuff, however, when we speak to one of Thrawn's cousins. Obviously not as bright as the Grand Admiral. This bartender with intentionally horrible grammar. Despite resembling Thrawn, he has such a slimy voice. It's like a drug dealer in a cartoon. Kyle treats him as such too. He requests Corellian ale, specifying that he wants it in a clean glass, and then asks questions about Relo. Throughout the exchange, he reveals he's got a lightsaber, and the bartender activates the alarm to try and kill Kyle. Moral of the story, kids:
Never trust a bartender with bad grammar.
A classic line from Kyle. When you start fighting off the gang members, you'll realize that they got a little carried away with the difficulty. Well, to be honest, it doesn't start off too bad. Having the Force is a sigh of relief for taking on the garbage hauling gangsters, but seriously, these gangsters pack quite a punch. Some of them carry bowcasters, and some throw thermal detonators. It's actually like the bar is going batshit crazy. In this part, the bowcaster guys are the biggest hassle. They seem to throw a lot, presumably because the level design is placed a lot, but they don't detonate right away. They bounce around, waiting a few seconds to explode. Basically, you gotta get up on a higher floor and deactivate the alarm Thrawn's cousin set off. You then proceed to force Thrawn's cousin to tell us where Relo is, and he gives us the indicator to follow the garbage collectors. And then, it's up to you whether or not he lives. Seriously, Thrawn's cousin just crouches like a little bitch, and you decide his fate. Something that this game could have done, but strangely didn't, is give us two endings. The last main game had a light side and dark side ending. Why not here? I don't know. It just seemed weird to me. This would have been the perfect opportunity to improve on Dark Forces 2, where you can make small decisions that affect the ending. That was the original idea, wasn't it? I'm just saying that would make for sufficient extra content. However, I hear this game's release cycle was kinda short, so I can see why they went with a linear story. Anyways, it's time to go back outside, and when it comes to enemies, we've got the same as usual.
But the problem is the fucking snipers!
Seriously, this level can become a hassle to many players, as the game includes snipers that make Crosshair look like a fucking joke. They resulted to at least 60% of my deaths on this level, and I game overed a lot. Some have criticized this level for its insane difficulty spike, but I never found it frustrating enough. Why? I'm not sure actually. Maybe it was because it was effective trial and error. Despite the fact that the snipers keep shooting at you, so you gotta be always on the move. If you play this on PC in particular, you'll eventually learn that you'll need to save and load every time you die. The checkpoints in this game in general are rather scarce, so that might be another criticism. Point is, this level will kick your ass. I suppose the main problem I had with it is that your force powers are sort of mitigated. This level probably wouldn't be half bad if you were more powerful, because you only get the level 2 force jump in the next level. I know they had to gradually progress your force powers, but I suppose in the flow of the story, something had to go first. Still though, maybe they should have removed the snipers. That seemed to be the biggest problem. Like seriously, think about it. If the snipers were taken out, the level would have probably still been challenging, but you wouldn't feel crammed in for having to take cover. At least at this point you've got a sniper rifle too, so you can shoot back at them for all the shit they'll cause you. I also have to say that it's easy to fall off, given narrow platforms and the like. No railings whatsoever. Seriously, someone could easily fall off and snap their necks, or worse. Point is though, when you eventually take out all the snipers, you'll go into a garbage hauler, straight to the Kingpin's base. If you cleared enough of the snipers, you won't encounter much trouble on your way over. With that, we're on to the next level. Fortunately, now that you're indoors, you still don't have to deal with snipers the same way you did in the first level. There still are grenade dicks, but aside from that, it's much easier. Also, the developers gave you the best reward for completing the last level. Level 2 Force Jump, as mentioned before. And trust me when I say this upgrade is going to help you out a lot. With that, we make it to Relo's base of operations, and Kyle remarks how much it stinks. The problem solving in this level is quite intricate. You have to go all over and unlock stuff to be able to progress. It may take a while, but it never became too frustrating. Except when I was struggling on where to go for a bit. Still though, this base is extremely expansive. The level 2 Force Jump was also used for more than just a reward. It's pivotal to this level. Eventually, you'll come across a big surprise guest appearance. Kyle goes into a holding cell area, and Lando Calrissian, voiced by Billy D. Williams, the original actor. Given this was made before Lando became Pando Lando due to wokeness at Disney, his appearance is much appreciated, and they nail the writing and personality of the character. Lando tells Kyle that Relo's thugs were starting shit on Cloud City, and so Lando tried to convince Relo to cut the crap and tell him who his employers were. The last thing before being thrown in this cell was hearing the name Dasan. Kyle explains who Dasan is and opts to find a way to free Lando. Lando tells us the password to get into Relo's command center is Ruby Bleals, which was a drink referenced earlier in the game by Thrawn's cousin. Anyways, we make our way to Relo's command center, which is jam-packed with turrets and enemies, and eventually we come across the dude himself. We see he's a Rhodian that ought to lose some weight. They probably should have called him Diabito.
Mama, may I have cookie?
No, Diabito. Roll back to kitchen.
Oh.
Anyways, Kyle and Diabito briefly talk about Dasan before Diabito pulls turrets and a handful of gangsters on us. Upon slashing those gangsters dead, we barge into Diabito's place, but the fat ass disappeared. We eventually free Lando and find the pipe system Diabito went through to escape. Now we can move on to the third and last Nar Shaddaa level. In this level, we and Lando fight our way past Diabito's thugs. Given we left the Raven's Claw back at the Jedi Academy, and the gangsters probably destroyed the ship we took to get here, Lando figures our best bet is his ship, the Lady Luck, seen in the Thrawn trilogy for example. So we head over to the Lady Luck. Lando tells us he needs the ship to get some fuel, and on top of that, open the bay doors. Despite this being partially outdoors again, the snipers were never as much of a hassle than they were in the first level here. I also like the vibe this level gives off, and what I mean by that is when we get around to refueling Lando's ship and opening the bay doors, we get onto the ship only to be greeted by Diabito on a gunner turret. This game does a good job at anticipating tense moments. I felt a similar way on Artis Prime, where Jan was captured by Dasan. It was very suspenseful, if that's the right word. If you play the game yourself, you'll know what I mean. Jedi Academy, in fact, doesn't quite replicate the feeling, despite just being an asset flip spin-off game. Anyways, we escape Nar Shaddaa and make it all the way to hyperspace, straight to Cloud City, as that's where Diabito's thugs stuck their thumbs up. Kyle has a nightmare about Jan's death, reminding us that he's still angered. Lando was unaware about Jan's death, as Kyle neglected to tell him, still broken over a loss. He confesses Jan's fate to Lando here, much to the apologism of Lando. With that being said, Lando drops Kyle off at the very bottom of Cloud City. It's around this time you'll get level 2 push and pull, and level 1 force healing. Despite that, the game teases you with the ultimate beginner's trap. You'll bust open a vent, and presumably wait for an elevator or something to come down, and what you're met with instead is a force that pushes you back and results in your death in the gas clouds of Bespin. Once you figure that out, you'll basically start slashing at Diabito's thugs again. There's a flaming room you need to get past, which is another beginner's trap. Eventually, you'll come across this room with falling platforms, and so you'll need to jump across to get to the next floor. Force speed and jump is pretty much a requirement here. I didn't realize for a while that this red stuff was actually walkable, so I just went around until that realization. After that, you've got this massive jumping chasm, resembling the area where Vader told Luke the massive reveal. Jumping up is actually pretty fun. Then we come across an enemy that, besides the snipers, give your skills a run for its money. Kyle senses a disturbance in the Force where we meet this guy. Who is he? Who cares? Only thing we need to know is that he's some dickhead with the Force. He jumps towards us, and we have our first lightsaber clash with him. As the first of what we'll encounter, this dude is not too hard, but he gets you to completely change your approach, given he can do to you what you can do to him, and you'll need to break his defenses. One of my most efficient tactics is jumping on his head until he's downed and slashing at him when he's vulnerable, because to be honest, I'm terrible at breaking the enemy's defenses. And the same applies to Jedi Academy too, but that's a discussion for another time. As such, we come across another Dark Jedi in the Carbonite freezing chamber, and I noticed as I was playing this, is that we're proceeding through this level in the opposite way Luke did in The Empire Strikes Back. Luke ended up in the bottom of Cloud City, while we start there. I don't know if this was supposed to be a reference, but I thought it's a cool observation. Anyways, we find that damn R5 unit, and we use it to get to the upper floors of Cloud City. Another beginner's trap occurs when we're supposed to escort R5, but fuck! The level designers got carried away with placing those darn trip mines. You'll be bound to bump into them. After you've got that first trap out of the way, you have this extremely daunting part where you have to escort R5, while disarming trip mines, and dealing with snipers at the same time. This is the sort of thing where you need to go ahead of R5 and destroy the traps, and hopefully do it without the snipers taking you out. It's pretty damn tough, and reminds me of the first Nar Shaddaa mission all over again. Eventually, you meet up with one of the Cloud City cops trying to hold back Diabito's thugs, and it's probably the first time in a while you have some allies. Unfortunately, they're all equipped with a puny blaster pistol, and let me remind you what the bad guys are armed with. So while they may serve as a distraction of sorts, they're not much of help. There's also some bullshit with the mines again after you take out two of the Dark Jedi, and Kyle even has some unique dialogue when you bump into them.
Pretty tricky.
I also came across a glitch where I killed a Rhodian thug, but he was unable to fall to the ground properly. Gravity was a bitch that day. Then we come across the Empire again, and the game shifts in difficulty again. The Empire is arguably way more fair than Diabito's thugs, and as soon as you meet them, the game picks up in the level design. I actually had some fun with this part, where I disarmed all the stormtroopers, and they reacted by raising their hands up in a surrendering gesture. Then I played God, and decided which out of all of them to spare. It's not a conventional part of the game, but I like how I was able to make my own side story in the middle of this video game. But then comes another trap with a Dark Jedi ambush. If there was ever a problem with this level, it's beginner's traps with things that you're going to be surprised by, because it's a straight up ambush. Besides that, we move on to the next level, in which it's nothing but Imperials. Again, way easier. Your force powers start to come full circle by now, and you indulge in the Jedi power fantasy, and you at least have some form of force heal. There isn't much to say about this level. It includes gaining access to areas, but to be fair, they build up to the boss fight by having you see Tavion, the one who killed Jan down on the docking platform. You fight all the way to her, in which Kyle finds out that Desan followed him to the Valley of the Jedi. She endlessly taunts him about it, and Kyle is pissed, as he naturally would be. This bitch killed Jan, and now it's time for some revenge. But with that being said, Tavion is pretty hard. She dodges all of your moves and flips around like a motherfucker. I at least died 7 or 8 times before I finally beat her. But kudos for a challenging boss fight, as this one requires strategy and precision. In my successful attempt, I opted to take the duel down to the lower platform and successfully caught her off balance and proceeded to slash at her until she thankfully died. Or was defeated canonically. The following scene starts off how you expect. Kyle uses the Force to choke Tavion, who begs for mercy, and Kyle responds by pointing out that she showed no such mercy towards Jan, until Tavion says in a desperate attempt to save her life that Jan is alive. When questioned, Tavion says that she's on Desan's ship, the Doomgiver, and that the transport she arrived on will take him to an Imperial asteroid base. Kyle contemplates on sparing her and decides to show mercy. He lets her off, something that would prove to be a mistake come the next game. Anyways, Kyle takes the transport, telling Lando to tell Luke about what's going on. And this is around the last time we see Lando in this game. Kyle travels to an Imperial asteroid base and sneaks around. Depending on where you go, you'll eventually meet a certain someone sooner or later. You open a door to come face to face with a stormtrooper, until Luke Skywalker comes down and slashes him dead. It's here where Kyle and Luke converse. Luke states that he's up to date with what's happening, and that the cortosis from earlier is being used to fuel Dark Jedi with saber-resistant armor. Still though, Luke makes sure not to panic. We still have the advantage due to our training and discipline, and then we get to fight Dark Jedi alongside Luke Skywalker. This was every kid's dream, to meet Luke Skywalker and fight as a Jedi alongside him, and we absolutely get a taste of that, and it's absolutely delicious. We take on stormtroopers and reborn Dark Jedi, and it's massive fun to have Luke at our side. Helping us in the sequence, after our fight is over, Luke notices that Kyle is more calm than before at the Academy. Kyle relays that Jan may be alive, and Luke says,
Sometimes even a small hope is enough to defeat the dark side, Kyle.
Yeah, this is why I don't happen to believe Rian Johnson when he claims Luke in The Last Jedi is, quote, 100% consistent with the original trilogy, because he clearly isn't. Rian Johnson did not do his research in the slightest. And that's the problem, because Disney is getting idiots who don't know their Star Wars to make Star Wars stories. Anyways, we go across the docking bay, and to be honest, I was a bit confused around this area, and it wasn't until half an hour later until I noticed an entrance that blended in with everything else. Oof, we've got an elevator jumping sequence, which will require some trial and error. If I have any criticisms, it's that the scenery for a while forwards doesn't change, and so you'll maybe start to get sick of it after a while. Basically, the only story here is making our way to the Doomgiver. The highlights are, of course, the impressive set pieces, like the electrical floor, some mini ATST-like things that blast at you, and oh yes, this part, where you have to dodge laser beams. You can push enemies onto it as well to achieve an easy victory. You'll get level 3 force speed, and thank God they gave you that for this level. We also have this tube thing that you have to jump over. The most challenging part is this area, where you need to pick off rocket troopers who pack a punch. Force jump is required, and the platforms are fairly narrow. The next level, however, is particularly memorable. You're introduced to the saber-resistant Dark Jedi, infused with the power of the Valley of the Jedi. These guys aren't that much different, except for the fact that they are lightsaber sponges to an extent. You need to get a lot of hits on them to kill them. Then we enter a unique highlight of the game, a stealth sequence, where you are required to sneak around the area until you make it to an area without alarms. They actually got pretty creative with this set piece. While there are no stealth weapons, which would indicate that the stun baton would have been really useful here, but at least a mind trick comes in handy to distract enemies. It's really primitive for a stealth sequence, but at least it isn't broken. As such, this is pretty tense. An impressive part of this stealth sequence is when you turn off the lights to run past enemies while they can't see you. The AI isn't really that advanced, so it's surprising that they programmed something this complex into the game. Eventually though, you'll step foot on the Doomgiver, in which Kyle will see Luke and Desan fighting each other, and Desan will flee to his ship, which takes off and goes straight into hyperspace. Through the comms, Kyle tells Luke that he's on the ship, and he'll deactivate the Doomgiver mid-hyperspace. And also, his personal mission to find Jan. The Doomgiver sequence will compile all the enemies you've seen so far into the ultimate challenge. There's still puzzle solving, like getting an R5 unit to open some doors for you, but otherwise, it's pretty straightforward, until you come across this puzzle sequence. I say puzzle sequence, but it's actually pretty easy. So what's the problem? Well, around this point, you get level 3 force jump, which is a blessing, but it's somewhat mitigated when you have to do these complicated, precise jumps. Just look at this. You have to activate the right symbol, and it's marked on your datapad so you don't even have to guess, but still, it takes so much skill and precise jumping to make it to every platform. Like seriously, why does the Empire have a room like this? Someone could easily fall off and snap their neck. Well, when we complete the puzzle, we contact Rogue Squadron, who tells us to take the shields down. And so first, we need to go find Jan. To make a long story short, we make it through a barrage of enemies in a hangar, in which we actually suck them all out into space if you feel like being cheeky. We make it to the prison cells and find Jan alive, in which Kyle is overjoyed that his partner is alive. It's here where Jan reveals that Desan plans to attack the Jedi Academy, and so now it's on to the shields, which takes us to the next level. The most notable thing in this level is perhaps the boss fight with Gallic Fire. This dude has no personal connection to Kyle and shows up in a prototype battle suit, I presume. We had something like this with Rom Mock in the original Dark Forces, but point is, Gallic is pretty easy. He surrounds himself with some sort of shield, but it'll come off half the time, after which you can slash him. I managed to kill him quite easily, and then it's a zero gravity sequence where we need to get to an escape pod as the ship blows up. Presumably everyone except Kyle, Jan, and Desan made it off board, with Desan leaving the ship eons before the other two characters. Thankfully, it's nice to get fresh air again with us crash landing in the swamps of Yavin 4. Although subtle for most of the game, we see Kyle and Jan kiss each other before the climax of the game, with both of them taking part of the defense of Yavin 4. The swamps are pretty moody, but on top of that, it's a breeze. I don't have much to say about this level, in fact. It's just a good level that is decently challenging and well designed. The next level is one that puts you in control of an AT-ST if the player wishes to do so. Alternatively, you could just force speed past everything. In the semi-final level, you make it to the Jedi Academy and fight past lots and lots of Dark Jedi. Thankfully, you've got Luke's students to help you. But let's be real. Let's talk about the real shit. The final boss. The final level has you chase after Desan, who fucks with you for a bit. But the most notable part is the final boss, in which Desan exclaims a new golden age with him as leader, with Kyle dismissing him and telling him that his plan has already been foiled. Desan contacts Admiral Fire, only to hear static on the other end. Desan tries to offer Kyle the chance to join him, but given Kyle's far away from the dark side at this point, he instead, in a smug voice, tells Desan that he should instead join him and the other Jedi. Of course, Desan refuses, and it's a classic saber duel. I appreciate Kyle's journey coming full circle here. He rejected the dark side outright when Jan was found alive, and now he's calm and controlled. And now all there's left to do is clean up the mess Desan caused. We've got maxed out level 3 force powers by this point anyways. You could just slash at Desan until he dies, or there is another option, get Desan to kill himself. Yep, a pacifist player's wet dream, where Desan brings his death on himself. In other words, his anger and lust for power has made him the very thing he swore to destroy. A pathetic weakling. We get a final scene in which Luke thanks both Kyle and Jan, where Kyle tells Luke that he may or may not join the academy, but for now, he and Jan are gonna take a vacation to a beachy planet called Spira. He and Luke shake hands, and that's the end of the game. What an excellent experience. If you can't tell already, my impressions are positive, although the game isn't without its problems. Sometimes it can be too hard, and the level design can be confusing at times, but it's a step up from the previous games because of the fluent controls. I suppose checkpoints were far from lenient, but still, there was a manual save feature, and as well as this, the story was pretty solid. I think the story could have focused on Desan more, because I preferred Jarek as a villain. Plus he had a connection to the main character, being the one who killed Kyle's father. But with that being said, Jedi Outcast was a great game. The positives far outweigh the negatives, and I am happy to have played it again. I give Jedi Outcast a 9 out of 10. This game is strong in the Force. So with Jedi Outcast fully reviewed, we've only got Jedi Academy left. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes? Hello there. I'm the serial plagiarist, and I'm very sorry this review is completely overdue, but I was writing this series with another guy, but he's been busy for months, so I figured, you know what, fuck it. I guess I'll just have to go on without him, because otherwise this series will not be finished in a timely manner, and there's already a gap between this review and the previous game Jedi Outcast. With that being said, Jedi Academy is the last entry in the Jedi Knight series of video games. It wasn't intended to be the last, but LucasArts had a massive audit in the mid-2000s thanks to one Jim Ward, and so many projects were cancelled. I'm talking stuff like Imperial Commando, among other games. But we're not here to talk about what never was. We're here to talk about Jedi Academy. And to be honest, I'm happy to say that for a series with 5 games, not a single one of them sucked. Sure, they've all got dated design, but what 90s or 2000s video games don't have dated design? Jedi Academy is quite easily the most playable game for modern audiences, but that's not to discredit the previous 4. Jedi Academy actually alleviates a lot of the criticisms I have about the whole series previously. Even though this is a revamped Jedi Outcast in gameplay, there's a lot of improvements to not just the combat, but the level design and overall structure of the game. This game is not above criticism, as no game is perfect, but hey, Jedi Academy is still a classic, and in this video, I'll be explaining why. So let's get into it. Jedi Academy has a simple main menu without music, just like every other game in the series. Since this game is built off the skeleton of Jedi Outcast, I don't want to re-explain the gameplay too much, save for the stuff they improved. Something interesting about this game is that you get to customize your main character, Jaden Core. I had no idea that Jaden was a gender-neutral name prior to playing this. You can actually play as a human, all the way to a Keldor or a Zabrak, although for both genders, human is the only mutual selectable one. This game reuses assets for the player character, so if you don't choose to play as a Rodian for example, you're going to see Rodian background characters. For the sake of this review, I'm going with Jaden Core's canonical face, which was established to be this Caucasian brown-haired, blue-eyed guy. The clothes were whatever for me, as I didn't care about playing as the default, and then when we customize our lightsaber, it can be from a variety of hilts, plus every in-game color minus red. I felt like being a bad motherfucker, so I went with purple. While limited, I did like how they offered to make the protagonist for this game your own through a customization system. It doesn't really change the game, but it's nice to play as a Rodian for example. What other game can you play as a custom Rodian? Anyways, after you create your character and his civilized weapon, we of course get the opening crawl, which of course I miss from modern Star Wars shit. I don't know why Disney got rid of it. So anyways, this game takes place 10 years after Endor, and 2 years after Jedi Outcast. The setup is simple and to the point. The Imperial Remnant is being further pushed back by the New Republic, and Luke is restoring his new Jedi Order on Yavin 4, and a promising student, Jaden Core, is invited to train as a Jedi after doing the unthinkable, creating his own lightsaber without formal Jedi training in the matter. Does this make Jaden a Mary Sue?
No!
And that's because you don't need Force training to build a lightsaber. It's plausible that Jaden got some instructions on top of hard work to do it. The story starts with that, and it tells us right off the bat that Jaden really wanted to be a Jedi. Anyhow, we get a cutscene of a transport being taken to the Jedi Academy. There was a glitch where the screen kept blinking in and out, and basically, 2 of the major characters are set up here. And to be honest, it's not the strongest start. This game perhaps has one of the worst pre-Disney Star Wars characters I've ever seen. Rosh Pennon. Who is completely immature and acts like a 5-year-old in all of his scenes. The voice actor has been in a bunch of Star Wars games, including Knights of the Old Republic, but his performance here is completely over the top. He worked as Dustil, for example, but here, nada. Our first impressions of him are not good. He intrudes on Jaden's space, and even though this game was released in 2003, they give the cue that Jaden is completely uncomfortable. It becomes so much more awkward if you play as female. Trust me, even if both interactions are completely the same, no matter what you look like, whether or not Jaden has a dick or not. They were probably going for some character building, but the best thing we get out of this scene is seeing how annoying Rosh is. He berates Jaden with questions, and it feels like a forced way to get some interaction. I would suggest a more natural way for the conversation to start, because Rosh intrudes on Jaden who is minding his own business. Rosh does a lot of speaking in this scene. His name is Rosh, he's excited, he's nervous, and it feels like he's underestimating the hardships of a Jedi, even under a more lax Grand Master like Luke Skywalker. That's not bad on its own, after all. Anakin Skywalker was much like this in A Phantom Menace. But as I said, Rosh is so immature, loud, and obnoxious, and believe me, it does not get any better. Anyways, when Rosh asks Jaden how he got his lightsaber, he's unable to give out the story because the shuttle they're on is hit and they crash land in the jungles of Yavin 4. As such, the shuttle's pilot contacts Luke Skywalker, who informs the pilot to lead everyone to the nearby Massassi Temple, while we see a red Twi'lek sneak into Luke's computer and steal stuff from it. As such, we are ready to play the level, and it's nothing too hard. A major improvement from the previous games is that you get your lightsaber right away, no questions asked, you just get it. And you value your lightsaber a lot because of it. It's your main weapon for most missions, and on top of the Force, it makes the game more consistent the whole way through. Jedi Outcast's first act was a completely different act from the rest of the game. Not that it was bad, but the shift in gameplay was a bit much. Here, the game feels consistent the whole way through. Of course, there's progression throughout the game, and increasing challenge and whatnot. It's not samey, but it's a good improvement from Jedi Outcast. Mysteries of the Sith was an improvement on the level design from Dark Forces 2, and you can say the same here. From the switch to id Tech 3 with Jedi Outcast, and the spin-off sequel Jedi Academy. So anyways, equipped with our lightsaber, we cut down a tree to make a path for Rosh, and we hike across the jungle. I don't know if this is an oversight, but you are given level 1 saber throw as your only force power. It's useful for taking out the jungle creatures as they screech out of their asses, and you take damage if you get too close. After Rosh demonstrates that he has limited force training, which doesn't really make sense canonically, the whole level is hiking across the jungle. They keep things simple for the start. The jungle creatures are sort of annoying, but thanks to your saber throw, you can dispatch them more easily. Afterwards, the pair encounter stormtroopers, and after taking them down, we get a base level 1 Dark Jedi. Even without the Force, he is your first challenger with a lightsaber, although he is easy to take down. You then proceed to approach the Massassi Temple, climb up, and see a woman holding a beaming scepter, along with 2 buff guys doing something. One of the buff guys notices you, and so the woman redirects the scepter to you, and Jaden is knocked out. Then, because we can't have a Jedi Knight sequel without him, Jaden when he wakes up is greeted by Kyle Katarn himself. Kyle displays his confidence and charisma, welcoming you to the life of a Jedi, and Jaden describes what he saw to the best of his ability concerning the glowing scepter, although it's not enough information to go with. Luke Skywalker shows up and orders everyone go back to the Jedi Academy, and he asks Kyle to stay here and investigate. Now I just love Kyle in this scene. You can tell he knows Luke so well that he knows what he's gonna say before he says it. Like when Luke says he senses a disturbance in the Force, Kyle responds,
"You always sense a disturbance in the Force."
And then it's on to the next scene. Now this game provides one of the biggest fantasies of any Star Wars fan when they're a kid, learning the ways of the Force and becoming a Jedi. Luke welcomes everyone and explains that due to limited masters, there will be multiple apprentices to one master. And as you might expect, Jaden and Rosh are paired up with Kyle. Rosh, being the overexcited, immature annoyance that he is, starts trying to suck up to Kyle, and you, as Jaden, can't help but think what the hell is wrong with Rosh. And the thing is, we never find out. Rosh is given no exploration or depth beyond wanting to be a Jedi and to learn the ways of the Force so badly. We don't know why he sucks up to Kyle so much, why he's so immature, and so on beyond the writers deciding to make him annoying. So with that being said, Jaden and Rosh go out to the training grounds to learn the Force. With that, we move on to the area and we learn the basics of the Force. We get an instant level 1 in all Force powers, including push, pull, speed, jump, and sense, and we actively test them out. To be honest, on repeated playthroughs, this part isn't that interesting, but a good thing about all the levels in this game is that they never go on for too long. The pacing is rather well done, and you never feel like you're having your time wasted. And the checkpoint system is really loose, but aside from that, I greatly enjoyed the whole experience. Really, the only story-worthy part in this level besides the end is when Rosh decides to activate one of the training droids on us. Jaden afterwards is incredibly annoyed after that hassle, and upon reaching the end, Rosh asks if he won. Kyle, of course, tells him that it wasn't a competition, then proceeds to scold Rosh for his poor judgment to activate the droid, as it would have killed Jaden if it was set to Luke's training regimen. Jaden is understandably pissed, but Kyle tells him to keep his anger in check, and so Jaden forgives Rosh. The way this is presented, the path they're setting for the characters is way too obvious. Rosh continues to be annoying by leaning on Kyle, who clearly doesn't like being leaned on. Luke comes in and reveals that the dead Dark Jedi that Jaden killed had symbols dating back to Marka Ragnos, a Sith Lord who died 5,000 years ago, and so far, that's their only clue. So yeah, this faction we're dealing with are the Disciples of Ragnos, a Sith cultist group. You think they'd be doing some unnerving cult stuff or something, but it's actually pretty underwhelming. I'd just like to say that the story doesn't really matter much in this game beyond just context, and the attention was mostly spent on the actual game for all the improvements, but I still wanted to talk about it. So past that point, we get onto the side missions before we can even think of progressing the main story. Yeah, so that's what I meant when I said the story was more of an afterthought. On the other hand, these side missions introduce variety, and are mostly 10 to 15 minute adventures that you can easily go back to, and you can play them in any order you want. There's 3 tiers for all 3 levels of Force usage, and a neat thing is that you can choose to level up secondary Force powers. Since these missions are completely standalone, I'll just describe in detail each one of them individually. I'll also be doing them in order. This game is a callback to the films in many ways, and that's why the first mission takes place on Tatooine. Apparently there have been mercenaries spotted in Mos Eisley who work for the Disciples of Ragnos, and so Jaden goes with Kyle to investigate. Side note, forget about Rosh. You don't go on any missions with them. And with that, upon arriving at Mos Eisley, we see all the mercenary ships. On top, of course, the Millennium Falcon. Told you this game had a lot of fan service. Kyle says he'll be going around the cantina to ask questions, and so Jaden is left on his own. After waiting for presumably a while, Jaden bumps into who else but Chewbacca. Han Solo never makes an appearance in this mission, but basically Jaden and Chewie team up to take on the mercenaries. Now the standard mercenaries are pretty much the same as stormtroopers, just with a skin change, but we also get a bunch of alien enemies. We proceed to fight with Chewie against the mercenaries, who lock the whole area down, and the momentum is pretty moderate. It's just a typical slashing mission against easily defeatable enemies, and that's not to say there's not any challenge, because you'll sometimes come across those sniper Rodians, and there's even the Dark Jedi at the end. The backdrop of Mos Eisley is pretty faithful to the films, although obviously outfitted to be the level that it is. When we've killed everyone, Kyle comes back and congratulates us. He pieces together that the Disciples of Ragnos are probably working with the Imperial Remnant, given the mercenaries we killed aren't cheap. With that being said, however, that's the mission. The next mission takes place on Tatooine. Again. Yeah, so we've got another mission on the planet with 2 suns. I guess I criticized the game there for not having a different planet, but thankfully, this is the only time we return to a planet in the side mission segments. This mission takes us to the more rural areas of Tatooine. Apparently, we're supposed to retrieve a droid from some Jawas before it's memory wiped. Since we're on rural Tatooine, we encounter hordes of sand people. They come with gaffy sticks and projectile weapons alike. There's also a bunch of innocent Jawas you can kill if you feel like being a dick, and we're taken across the hills, killing those Tusken savages that cause us problems until we get to the Sandcrawler. The Sandcrawler interior is actually kind of interesting, as you have to solve a bunch of mini puzzles, retrieve the droid, and then kill those animals.
I hate them!
It's after this point that we literally get our only interaction with Rosh, and boy, if there was ever a lack of subtlety, this would be it. Rosh asks a fellow unnamed student whether he feels like he's being held back, because Rosh expresses frustration that Kyle is holding him back, and yada yada. Looking at this scene years after I first played this game, it hasn't aged any better. This is such an obvious setup, and it's frankly ridiculous they tried to keep us in suspense later on. You'll see what I mean. This is topped off with the fact when Kyle himself comes in, and Rosh keeps what he said a secret. So yeah, next we go to the planet Bakura, which is featured in the EU novel Truce at Bakura, which I haven't read yet, so I'm probably missing a lot of context, but basically there's been a disturbance on the world, so we're sent to investigate. Despite being ordered to wait for Kyle to show up, Jaden gets fed up with waiting, and given the situation may be urgent, Jaden chooses to go and investigate. As soon as he goes inside the facility and looks through the security camera, he sees that the Imperial remnant has planted bombs all across. And it becomes a situation reminiscent of one of the Die Hard movies, where you gotta stop them. Most of the enemies you'll face are Imperials, and the level is really simple, albeit unclear, since I kinda struggled to memorize where all the bombs are. Thankfully there's no time limit, so I fortunately could take as much time as I needed. Aside from some trip mines, you probably won't take any serious damage, and this is probably one of the least memorable side missions, as there's not really any urgency, and it becomes sort of frustrating to find all the bombs. However, once you're done with that, you return to your ship, and Kyle apologizes for not showing up. The end. Alright, so next comes my no joke, least favorite mission in the whole game, and if you've played this game, you know what I'm talking about. A merchant ship was attacked by the Remnant and crash landed on a planet named Blengil, if that's how you pronounce it. The planet is thought of as being completely uninhabited, but when you go over to the planet, you also crash land due to some severe lightning or something. Jaden sarcastically remarks how great the rescue mission is going, before he walks out onto the surface. He calls out for any survivors, and thankfully, there is one guy who in a panicked voice runs over to you. But unfortunately, we get the side of this thing. The thing proceeds to devour the survivor,
And it's gone.
and that's the setup for the mission. Now, with signifying what you're doing, it's perfectly fine. The problem, however, is that it turns Jedi Academy into a nightmarish horror game for this one mission. In a lot of horror games, you're completely stripped of your power, and the same is true here from a certain point of view. You've still got the Force, but given you're still at level 1, you can't jump that high, and Force speed is more limited. You'll catch on pretty quickly that the sand is a death trap, and you want to spend as little time touching the sand as possible. Otherwise, you're going to be eaten. The anxiety I felt in this mission was high, as I was forced to collect parts from the wreckage to repair my ship. You can only hold the repair parts one at a time, so you'll often be returning to your ship. The sandworm is pretty much the threat you'll be facing. The game forces you to be strategic on how you collect the repair parts that are out on the sand, requiring you to use both force, speed, and jump. Now, the level is admittingly pretty engaging that way, but since it turns the whole thing into a nerve-wracking experience, it's why I don't like it. I always dread coming back to this mission, and sometimes I just start the game with level 2 force powers, as this level is far from tame. We learn after the mission that apparently the sandworms are called sand borrowers, but at least we're told that the Coruscant government is going to mark the world as hazardous. So yeah, now we've got our final level 1 mission, and after the nightmare we just went through, we ironically finish off with one of the best missions in the game. This one takes place on Corellia, and right off the bat, we get some excitement. We board a tram that is accelerating at a ridiculous rate, and discover that the tram's been hijacked, so the disciples of Ragnos can play out their own version of 9/11, but with trams. The environment is probably the best out of all the levels. It's raining, and there's actually some reaction to going up against the rain. We come across numerous thugs and mercenaries, and the momentum is pretty strong, as we're required to get to the front of the tram to stop it from accelerating. I was reminded a bit of Spider-Man 2 here. This level is great because not only is the threat well established, but it feels exciting. The enemy variety is pretty good, and actually having an animation when facing the rain was nice attention to detail. So yeah, a pretty superb level, and with that, we're on to our next story mission. Luke gathers everyone, and discusses how someone sliced into his personal records and found out about places where he felt a strong connection to the Force. Rosh, being the twat that he is, smugly asks,
What could they get from that besides a tour?
Wow, what an asshole.
Luke suspects that the disciples of Ragnos are draining the Force somehow, given the aura from the Masasi Temple was gone after the Scepter people showed up from earlier in the game. So yeah, For some unknown reason, the disciples of Ragnos are using that mysterious scepter to drain the Force from certain areas, and they seem to be doing it from all over the galaxy. So Luke assigns everyone to their own mission. Kyle goes to the Valley of the Jedi, obviously, and the overconfident Rosh is excited that he's finally getting some real action, and dismissively doesn't care about the cult's motives. Jaden in fact has to remind him that they're not full Jedi yet, they're all just students. Anyways, Luke sends Jaden to Hoth, where he had a vision of Obi-Wan Kenobi. As well as that, he sends Rosh to the remains of the planet Biss, which was destroyed in Dark Empire. And with that being said, we're all off to our respective missions. Rosh smugly wishes us good luck and to call him if we need any help. And with that, we head to Hoth. Upon arriving to the Ice World, Jaden spots a light beacon. Now what's cool about this mission is that you can get on any Tauntaun you like and ride it. You can in fact use your lightsaber or blaster on top of that. You will inevitably come across snowtroopers, and that's where you know the Empire is here. They're not the only enemies, however, as you will soon enter a cave with a hungry Wampa, and you gotta kill it. The size and scale of the thing is really put into perspective. It's huge compared to you, and it's pretty intimidating. Afterwards, you'll eventually kill more snowtroopers, avoid an ATST, and make it inside the interior of a facility. After that, you'll fight your way to get to Echo Base, and you'll have to find a secret entrance to make it inside the actual base. The ambience throughout all of this is pretty good at replicating The Empire Strikes Back, and when you get inside the base, you'll feel the vibe of an abandoned military base, overrun by the wrong people. Then you'll spy on a dark Jedi telling a mysterious person named Alora about how, after looking through Rogue Squadron's flight patterns after the evacuation, they determined that Luke went to Dagobah, and after killing the dark Jedi, Jaden decides to have a look around for Alora. We do eventually come across her, and she's a smug, irritating shit talker, and so it's only our best interest to fight her. To describe how the boss fight went, I was pretty weak as a level 1 Jedi. I opted to keep my distance, and wait until Alora did something like a lightsaber throw that left her defenseless so I could get a free hit. I'm the sort of player who cheats the system if I can make things easier. Ironically, one of the easiest ways to get a free hit on a lightsaber wielding enemy is to use Force Grip on them, which will shortly deactivate their lightsaber and potentially give you enough time to get a free hit. I'm pretty sure the game designers built the game in a way to be more challenging, but hey, if I can do it, it's part of the gameplay. I've started using this tactic for ages since I started playing this game, and that's because it works. Alora flees when we defeat her, and we're forced to go back to the Jedi Academy. Jaden proceeds to inform Luke and Kyle on what he knows, and after Luke briefly explains Yoda's self-imposed exile, Kyle explains that everyone except Rosh has been accounted for. Of course. Luke senses that he's still alive, but let's be real, I don't think anyone's upset that Rosh is absent for the next segment of the game. I never liked him, and it's a breath of fresh air that he's missing. With that being said, however, we are promoted to the rank of apprentice, and we are leveled up to level 2 force powers, as well as our next set of 5 side missions. Believe it or not, but that level 2 upgrade greatly assists the enjoyability of the game, and as well as that, the missions get more intricate and challenging. So let's go through all of them. Our first mission is to some cesspit world named Nar Crater, in which a bunch of elders went to see a Hutt crime lord, but never returned. So we've got to investigate. Jan Ors is the pickup, while we as Jaden are the escort for whatever prisoners we find. It seems like a simple rescue mission, but it comes with a twist. And that's what makes it interesting. When we unlock the cell to the first batch of prisoners, upon approaching them, we find out what the Hutt had in store for them. A hungry Rancor appears out of nowhere, and we gotta run to safety. Upon making it to the exit area, one of the prisoners gives us a key card he stole, and tells us to free the other elders. Now, since I've played this game a million times, I know how to complete this mission as quickly and efficiently as possible. I basically went through all levers to free the prisoners, and then I escorted them one at a time. I didn't have to worry about the Rancor, since it would have been holed up near the area we had to escape, and the trick is to lure the creature away so the prisoners can escape. The game is a bit lenient and allows a few of the elders to be eaten, but if too many of them die, it's game over. This mission in general is not one of my favorites, and in fact, I used to dislike it. But when I figured out how to rig the level in my favor, I'd say it's more of a mid-tier mission then. Anyways, that's my critique of that particular level. Let's move on to the next. The next mission is rather exciting and unique. We're supposed to meet up with a contact who knows something about the disciples of Ragnos. Simple enough setup, but with that being said, what makes this level interesting is that it's done mostly on speeders. Yeah, that's right, this is a vehicle-based level, in which we proceed to speed across a wide yet linear path, all the while avoiding mercenaries sent to kill us. What I like is that you have 3 means of attack. The speeder guns themselves, your lightsaber to take out enemies who get too close on the side, and the E11 blaster, which you can use to shoot on the side. I guess the main criticism I have is that there's only one checkpoint, and it happens too early on in the level. It only took me around a minute to get to the contact's place, and to make a long story short, he gets sniped before he can reveal anything. And that's where we get the checkpoint, in which we got a ride to safety, which took me around 5 to 6 minutes on my successful run. Yeah, that's right, this mission lasts for roughly 7 minutes if you know where you're going, and you get the checkpoint at minute 1 rather than around the halfway point. That means that playing this game organically, you're likely to screw up, and I did. Check this part out, where I had to use the boost button to make it across without dying, and I almost made it. But almost there was not good enough and I died in a dramatic fashion. It actually almost felt like a movie moment there. And since I didn't quick save, I had to start from the checkpoint all over again. So yeah, I wish the mission had the checkpoint split in half of the mission's runtime. That's my criticism. Otherwise, it's great. Your speeder likely won't last forever, so you'll have to switch if your speeder gets too damaged. As such, that's the mission. Race and fight to the end. Simple, straightforward, to the point, and most of all, fun. Next comes the planet Krildor, in which we gotta disrupt the Imperial Remnant station there, where Jantilles himself is our guide through this whole mission, as he and Rogue Squadron work with us to take out the facility. We have to land, and then place beacons so that Rogue Squadron can bomb them. Yeah, we are given the location to place the bomb, and since there's no mini-map, if you forget where to place the bomb, you're not going to be told again, so it's important that you watch the cutscenes. Aside from that, the mission is straightforward and packed with enough enemies to provide a decent challenge. It's a good thing we're the ground support, but I don't think the engine could properly support X-Wing combat given its clunky nature with vehicles. Like, the speed is controlled just fine, but it could have been better, you know. There isn't a lot to say. It's sort of like the mission at Bakura, except with a little more flair and less hard to find the detonation spots if you pay attention to the cutscenes. Although, like the last mission, the checkpoint system is terrible, coming very late into the mission. You'll also come across jet troopers.
They fly now! They fly now? They fly now!
Yeah, you knew I was gonna pull that joke. The jet troopers are kind of annoying if you're used to lightsaber combat, and you're gonna need to whip out a weapon and shoot them, and they are bullet sponges on top of that. Anyhow, that's the mission. Just plant bombs all over the facility, and then deactivate some bombs the Remnant place to get rid of their resources to avoid the New Republic from taking them. That's the mission. Next comes one of my favorites, because once again, it's a level with a straightforward objective. There's a crime lord on Coruscant named Lanik Rakdo, who is supplying the galaxy with illegal assassin droids. Although he obviously doesn't go quietly, as he literally rigs the bridge to his estate or whatever, and blows it up. So we've got to do things the hard way, killing his thugs and some of the assassin droids he had produced. I see why they required a Jedi to do all this, given Rakdo's presumably dangerous reputation. He's a one-off character, but still. Yeah, so this mission is going all across Coruscant and making it to Rakdo's estate. And when we catch up to him, he pulls some of the assassin droids on us, requiring us to take them all out. The droids have electrical shields that harm you if you get too close, but if you've got Force Lightning, you can actually take them out rather quickly. and arrest Rakdo, who spills the beans at the factories hidden on Nar Shaddaa, and we proceed to shut it down in the end mission briefing. Then comes the last mission before the next story mission. We're sent to some hideout Imperial base, except when we get there, we are immediately held at gunpoint and forced to surrender. However, the commander in charge of the base, Rax, decides that he's so goddamn bored that he's gonna let us out for a game of Hunt. This guy is a complete idiot, and so our goal is to show him how poor his judgment was. So yeah, for this entire mission, we are stripped of our lightsaber, which sort of changes how this level is played. In every other mission, the lightsaber was our top weapon, but now that it's been taken from us, we have to rely on ranged weapons. We quickly collect them as there's some convenient E11 sticking by the wall after Rax lets us out. You might think this might make everything more like Jedi Outcast's first third, but that's not completely true, because we've still got one effective weapon on our side. The Force! Yeah, so although we don't have a lightsaber, we can still push and pull enemies, jump around, slow down time with Force speed, and so on. I invested in a lot of dark side powers, so I was able to electrocute countless enemies, and with level 3 Force Lightning, it causes them to be launched out like a catapult. Still, this level is pretty well designed, as Rax taunts us as we make progress. We can control the ATST in this mission briefly, and there's a large variety of enemies, all building up to a climactic boss fight with Rax. Equipped with the most powerful range weapon in the game, we have to jump up to his floor and punish him for all the shit he put us through. Problem is, if he's got a good shot at you, he's taking it, and he takes away a lot of health, so you have to avoid him. What I tend to do is get close, force push him down with the Force, and blast him with weaponry. Still, he is quite challenging, especially since he can't jump to your maximum potential. After he pays the price for his arrogance, we have completed all the side missions, and we are ready for the next development. Luke gathers everyone, and since the disciples of Ragnos already drained the Force from every place mentioned in his journal, they're gonna have to go to some additional places he didn't mention. Reactive to how Rosh went missing, everyone this time will be traveling in pairs. So Jaden and Kyle are sent to the planet Vajun, and anyone who knows about Dark Empire will know exactly where we're going, as initially Kyle is confused, but Luke explains that one of his father's castles lay there. Kyle alludes to Dark Empire to Jaden by mentioning that apparently Luke went to Vajun once, but he never really talked about it. I guess indicating that that part of Dark Empire was kept a secret. Still, exploring the interior of Vader's castle in a video game is a pretty exciting premise for the next story mission. That's where we land on Vajun. Although the thing is, if you didn't invest in Force Protect, this mission is going to become at least 25% harder, and that's because Vajun has so much acid rain outside. On top of that, we get these puffed up stormtroopers with the heavy weapon Rax possess. The upside is that once we kill them, we can collect the weapon and use it against future enemies. The atmosphere is pretty good, and it gives the vibe that we're getting the lead up to something. We go to town on a lot of enemies, such as tough-ass Dark Jedi, and the goal of staying out of the acid rain as much as possible gives us a huge obstacle. If you don't have Force Protect, the best medicine is Force Speed. However, you'll have to be prepared for the puffed up trooper ready to blast you with their heavy weapon. I believe you can deflect their weapon if you use Force Push at the right time, but this is impractical, since the weapons and force powers have to be selected side by side, and this is before weapon wheels were common in games. That's why I commonly have to prepare for an encounter with one force power before I actually jump into battle. So yeah, it's a tad impractical, but it in no way kills the game. And again, this is before weapon wheels were common. Across the level, we'll be blocked by TIE bombers, and so we have to fight our way to a turret. That will allow us to take out the bombers, in which we'll then rush all the way to the inside of Vader's castle. Afterwards, we don't have to worry about any more rain, but that doesn't make things less difficult. The doors are locked, and we're forced to go down a garbage chute to find a way across the castle. Navigating the castle is mostly interesting, and I even recall there being banter from two stormtroopers, in which they talk about how Vader apparently used stormtroopers for lightsaber practice when he was alive, While humorous, it's referencing one of my most hated tropes. Anyways, we basically make our way up and up, avoiding being fried in the water by electricity, and then we're proceeding to avoid laser beams that are conveniently here to annoy us. We get split up from Kyle, and we have to continue the third stage of Vajun without Kyle. Now, the third portion is probably the most fun. We've got lots of Dark Jedi to fight, as well as varied enemies like various combat droids, and we even come across the destroyed statue of Darth Vader, with Jaden remarking that someone didn't like Vader much, and only by reading Dark Empire will you learn exactly what happened here. We conveniently get some equipment before the boss battle, and as one probably predicted, Rosh along with two buff cultists from the start are draining force energy from Vader's meditation chamber. Yeah, so Rosh predictably turned to the dark side in a nanosecond, and proclaims to Jaden how Kyle was holding them back. And Rosh becomes even more shallow and unlikable before he proceeds to activate his now red lightsaber and attack us, along with the two cultists. Yeah, so we're forced to fight Rosh. The trick is that you need to kill his two sidekicks first, as they will heal Rosh in the middle of a battle, undoing any damage you did against him. Although it's hard to get a hit on the two cultists since they'll push you away and dodge most of your attacks, still, it's not overly annoying, and it's not like Super Star Wars where they have enormous health bars, and in fact, when you've taken the two cultists out, you can go to town on Rosh, although upon defeating him, Kyle shows up, and it's revealed who leads the Disciples of Ragnos. Yeah, it's Desan's apprentice from the last game, Tavion, who steps in to save Rosh at the last second, and Tavion reveals that she now decided to serve Marka Ragnos, who could offer her more power than Desan ever could, and gloats in Jaden's face, as Rosh willingly joins Tavion, and upon doing so they both escape. But not before Tavion destroys Jaden's lightsaber, and he and Kyle are caved in which Jaden used Kyle's lightsaber to cut a hole and escape. Yep, so obvious plot point is obvious, although at least the second twist wasn't so obvious. Tavion being the leader makes sense, and they do heavily reference the last game, in which she's spiteful at how Kyle spared her life. Anyways, back at the Jedi Academy, we piece most things together. Since Tavion is the leader, the cultists may have Desan's leftover Dark Jedi from the Empire Reborn, and as well as that, Tavion may be empowering the Dark Jedi with a Scepter of Ragnos, which she possesses. Luke then proceeds to promote Jaden straight up to Jedi Knight, which feels like quite an accomplishment despite it being one line of dialogue, and Kyle congratulates Jaden, although he warns him about how he felt his anger during his duel with Rosh, and warns him about the lure of the dark side. So next we've got to construct a new lightsaber, and we've got additional options this time. We can go to a dual wielding position, or the double-bladed saber, and this was all part of the game's gimmicks, at how it improves over Jedi Outcast. I have spoken a lot about the level design, but not much about the lightsaber combat, but let me tell you, that these two additional saber types does significantly improve the combat. It's worth noting that you won't be the only one with the advantage if you choose so. Honestly, I learned that having the double-bladed saber was actually the best, and I'll explain as we get into the first mission, in which we're sent to the tomb of an unnamed Jedi Knight on Chandrilla. As soon as we enter the Endless Canyon, we force push a rock, in which a mercenary is unfortunate enough to meet his demise, and then we're faced with a level 3 Dark Jedi. Now this is why the double-bladed saber is best, and that's because it can break through defenses twice as easily. You can also kick enemies to the ground if you wish, but that's the appeal of the double-bladed lightsaber. The dual wielding doesn't have that same appeal, so yeah, the double-bladed saber is efficient. I suppose you could use a single hilt again, but that's really if you want to challenge yourself only. If you're granted an opportunity to upgrade, you better take it. This level is probably one of the most challenging, as there's a deep chasm that is an instant death, as well as inexperienced Dark Jedi that pop up to challenge you, and the level is longer than usual, and the checkpoint system doesn't make things much easier, because if you fall or get slashed in half, it's all the way back to the checkpoint. But even making it to the checkpoint is difficult to an extent. Past the checkpoint, you'll actually need to pull off a perfectly timed force speed jump, which utilizes both powers. After jumping around for a while, we eventually enter the Jedi Knight's tomb. in which we proceed to close the tomb for good, and we're forced to get out as the area collapses in on itself. But however, we have stopped the disciples of Ragnos from even thinking of siphoning force power from this tomb. Well done. Here's a cookie. Anyways, next mission, in which we're taken to the spaceport of Tanab to investigate sightings of cultists in the area. As one might suspect, however, they have an evil plan, and that's unleashing a mutated, near unkillable rancor on the spaceport. Yeah, so now this becomes a chase mission, in which we are the prey. The mission requires you to act fast and escape from the rancor, and the rancor with its mutations will bust open the doors and will make its way over to you. It causes so much chaos in the spaceport, and delayed flights are probably the least of everyone's concerns, as we figure out how to trap the rancor in between a large crate and a force field generator. It has to be well timed, however, as you'll have to do it again if the rancor isn't in line to be killed. If I had to describe this level, it's pure chaos. The rancor is large and intimidating, and being upgraded with level 3 force powers doesn't make it any less threatening, although I'd say the sandworms were worse. This might ironically be one of the most enjoyable levels in the whole game, as a matter of fact. There's a rush and a panic, and the rancor destroys things to get to you, and there's a ton of Dark Jedi to slow yourself down. Superb. Next, we've got a mission to destroy a cloaking device on the lost world of Yalara, which was lost to begin with because the cloaking device masked it. Anyways, when it seems like nobody's home, we enter through the front door, and are met with a strange sight. A Nogri warrior holding a fart gun. Yeah, what else could it be? It shoots toxic green gas that sounds like it comes from your ass. It's a fart gun. Despicable Me style.
I am not afraid of your jelly guns.
Oh, this ain't a jelly gun, sunshine.
Despite the fart gun not being what you'd expect, that's the weapon the Nogri are equipped with. You'll also see the Imperials and cultists fighting against the Nogri. So the Nogri here aren't caught up to speed on modern galactic history, since this is canonically 5 years after the Thrawn trilogy. You'll have to climb the tower to get to the top, and there's actually a bit with some spinning fans, which I'm guessing is the air conditioning system. I always wondered how that worked in Star Wars, but upon getting to the top, we rig the cloaking device with bombs and do a leap of faith, presumably into the water. This mission was pretty fun, and next we're met with an absolute banger. We're sent on a mission with Kyle to the destroyed asteroid system where the planet Biss was for safety, but the Imperial remnant is there and catches the Raven's Claw into a tractor beam, and so we've got to break free. So it's killing Imperials, some of which with big guns, avoiding traps, and then deactivating the tractor beam, and then going to the bridge to take out some TIE fighters that attack the ship, before everything goes to self-destruct mode and we gotta escape. I don't have much to say about this particular mission. It's got good pacing, it's fun, and it's straightforward. Certainly beats the confusing level design of every game previously in the series. Now, as you probably expected, then comes the last side mission before we get the final story sequence, and that involves us heading over to the wastes of Orn Mantell to destroy old supplies of weapons, so they don't fall into the wrong hands. The place is pretty much abandoned, and it is for the most part, but you know there's always got to be a catch, and boy oh boy is there a catch. In fact, it's the ultimate catch. As we proceed to start blowing the first cache up, a certain bounty hunter comes down with a jetpack to confront us. You want to know who it is? Why yes, it's none other than Bobby Fett. Bobby gives Jaden the option to walk away, but upon Jaden's refusal, Bobby springs into action, and man is he quick on his feet, despite his weight. So yeah, we've got to destroy all the caches in the area. All the while Bobby Fett chases us, and he will always know where you are. The mission is a straightforward cat and mouse fight, as Bobby Fett is invincible for most of the mission. But upon destroying the last cache, we are forced to fight the obese bounty hunter in order to escape. He has the jetpack, but he's also got a flamethrower, and easily switches between weapons, such as a rocket launcher. He's a more beefed up jet trooper, but is reasonably defeatable. And upon defeating him, he decides he's done with us, as he remarks that, after all, there's no bounty on our head, and flies away. Since Kyle met Boba Fett in Dark Forces, he calls back to that moment in the end mission briefing, before we are urgently called back to the Jedi Temple, in which Luke has figured out what Tavion is doing with the scepter. She's going to use the scepter to resurrect Marka Ragnos, and explains that, according to legend, if enough force energy is infused into a body, the cells might regenerate, bringing whoever back to life. With that being said, we're all heading to Korriban, and again, I have to note Dave Filoni's lethal mistake with assuming that the name Korriban was lost by thousands of years, which wasn't true. But this video ain't about Dave Filoni. I just wanted to mention him. Anyways, before we head to Korriban to stop the disciples of Ragnos, Kyle informs us that he's received an urgent distress signal from Rosh, where he's being held captive on Taspa 3. Jaden points out that it may be a trap, but Kyle objects that he's not willing to let Rosh die there if it isn't, and gives Jaden the ultimatum to help out or not, and Jaden decides he's coming. So yeah, before the main event, we make it to Taspa 3, which is a lava planet. Same deal here. There isn't really much story in the first half of this planet. It's fighting our way past enemies of all types and avoiding the lava. It's pretty challenging with the Dark Jedi and puffed up troopers they throw at you, and to be honest, the checkpoint system is scarce like a lot of levels, but eventually, after all that nonsense, we make it to the second half, in which Allura is there to greet us. She continues to be that smug shit talker, taunting us about Rosh. She eventually throws us his lightsaber, and we're forced to fight to get to Rosh. This place is basically a large factory, filled with Dark Jedi and Imperials, and we use our advanced force skills to the test. Allura will taunt us at every stop we make, until we make it to a certain platform, and find Rosh. Although despite agreeing to come along with Kyle, Jaden is incredibly pissed. Rosh tries to insist that he was wrong, and asks to be taken back to the Academy. Although Jaden isn't buying it so quickly. Jaden reminds him that he tried to kill him, and he was always so arrogant and thinking he was hot shit. Allura encourages Jaden to finish Rosh, although Kyle from afar steps in to warn Jaden about the lure of the dark side, and as you might expect, we're being set up for two endings. We can either deactivate our lightsaber, or attack Rosh with it. And so the game is split into two endings, both of which take us on a parallel path. So I'll talk about them side by side. The decision goes pretty much as you expect. Believe it or not, I was initially tempted to go with the dark side ending first because I hated Rosh, but then I realized I could just double back through save files later. So yeah, I initially spared Rosh, and in the light side ending, Allura decides to attack us since we won't be turned, resulting in Rosh's arm being cut off. In the dark side ending, Jaden attacks Rosh, and despite the attempts to beg for his life, Jaden's had enough of him, and then impales him.
Jaden, no!
And it's gone!
But that doesn't mean that Jaden's part of the disciples of Ragnos, as he then aggressively remarks that the scepter of Ragnos belongs to him, and he's not going to serve Marka Ragnos or Tavion. In fact, he thinks he should be in charge. A notable change is how the voice actor puts on a dark, aggressive voice post-fall to the dark side. But basically, in both versions, it's a fight with Allura, who is the same in both versions. She isn't too hard if you can break through her defenses like I can, but otherwise she's a reasonable challenge, and it's satisfying to put this hench girl in her place, although of course the context is different in both versions. In the light side outcome, Kyle shows up to help Rosh, and Jaden has to go to Korriban. Although he asked Kyle to tell Rosh he said thanks for making him see past his anger. Of course, in the dark side outcome, there's no such interaction. After Jaden kills Allura, Kyle finds Rosh dying alone and comforts him before he dies. But Kyle immediately realizes what Jaden is doing now, and how he's got to get to Korriban. So yeah, Jaden in both versions heads straight to Korriban for the opposite reason. In the light side outcome, he'll meet up with his fellow Jedi, and they'll help us finish the disciples of Ragnos. However, in the dark side outcome, his fellow students sense the dark side in Jaden, and Jaden opts to kill both of the Jedi who confront him. So yeah, the main difference is that in the dark side ending, everyone is against you, whereas in the light side ending, you'll be backed up by all the Jedi in the level. Regardless, the level design is mostly the same. You'll be using the Force to open up gateways, and the fact that not everyone is focused on you makes things interesting. although obviously it's mostly the same, just fighting the way to Marka Ragnos' tomb. Skipping right ahead to the confrontation with Tavion, Jaden opts to fight Tavion for either noble or selfish reasons. Either way, Tavion uses the scepter during the boss fight, and given it's a giant beam, jumping is required. Otherwise, she isn't very hard to take down. One of the main differences between the endings, however, is who we face at the end of the game. In the light side ending, Tavion refuses to concede, and so she uses the scepter to resurrect Marka Ragnos, who has as much of an intimidation factor as a Scooby-Doo villain. He spouts some generic bad guy dialogue, and then opts to possess Tavion, which results in her death. Yeah, the villain kills his own men cliche. So then we have a boss fight against Marka Ragnos in Tavion's body. He's a bit beefed up, but obviously he's not at full power. And after we defeat him, he spews some more generic dialogue about how he would have returned if it weren't for us, the meddling Jedi. And so he's forced back into his tomb. The story then closes with Luke and Kyle congratulating Jaden, and we see Rosh get a new arm, as Jaden is honored as a Jedi, while Rosh gets his lesson about the easy pursuit of power. So yeah, happy ending. And it's kind of generic and boring. Nothing is really accomplished aside from Jaden fulfilling his potential as a Jedi, and that being it. Rosh doesn't appear ever again, and I think we all know why, but speaking of Rosh, he was wasted. He's probably one of the most hateable expanded universe characters, and fortunately, they learned their lesson and didn't feature him in anything else. With that being said, however, what a piss poor arc. An arrogant Jedi in training falls to the dark side, and then changes his mind, and the final choice of the protagonist is based around that. This is probably the time that the bad ending is better than the good ending, because in the dark side ending, upon defeating Tavion, she decides not to beg for mercy again, and accepts her fate as Jaden cuts her down. Then Kyle shows up, insisting that he can still turn away from the dark side, although Jaden doesn't listen. Jaden has a personality change of course from his dark side act, and talks like an evil bad guy. Not as generic as Marka Ragnos, but still not very good. Obviously we as the now bad guy fight our former master, and well, it's an instant improvement story-wise, because we spent the whole game training under Kyle. Kyle also has a unique moveset where if he gets too close, he grabs and beats us up. He also is actually harder than Marka Ragnos, since he utilizes light side powers to his advantage, like heal, protect, and absorb, which I didn't talk about, but basically absorb regenerates force powers if someone tries to use any power against you. Although it's probably the second worst power behind dark side rage, which is literally a self-defeating power that drains your health, even if you get a boost up. Anyways, Kyle is the better boss fight as well as the emotional stakes being way better. However, as you might expect, Jaden manages to defeat Kyle, shooting the scepter at him, burying him with a pile of rocks, all before leaving. Luke comes in, asking Kyle if he's alright. Now this scene is actually probably one of the best in the game, and it makes me wonder if the dark side ending should have been the canon one, since they confirm in a novel later down the line that Jaden chose the light side. In this scene, Kyle admits with great shame that Jaden took the scepter and killed Rosh. After knowing that he lost both his students in the worst way possible, he reflects self-doubt to Luke. He isn't sure he should be teaching at the Academy, and it's not like he's been the perfect Jedi himself, to which Luke responds,
"No, Kyle. Yoda and Ben were both great teachers, yet even they lost students."
And that, my friends, is how you know how out of character Luke was in The Last Jedi. Despite not being the canon ending, the dark side ending of Jedi Academy is an incredibly accurate representation of both Luke and Kyle, and how they would realistically respond to this situation. Luke reminds Kyle that even the best Jedi Masters can lose students. And this is definitely applicable to the films, with Yoda losing Count Dooku to darkness and Obi-Wan with Anakin. This one line says a lot about Luke's optimism, and is a perfect line of defense against Jake Skywalker defenders. They conclude this version of the ending with Kyle stating that he's taking a leave of absence from the Academy to hunt down Jaden and have the scepter destroyed, as we see Jaden take over the Imperial remnant with the scepter in his possession. The end. So that's Jedi Academy, and while it is an inferior story to Jedi Outcast, it's still a damn good game. The improved lightsaber combat and refinement to Jedi Outcast as well as the decision to give us the lightsaber right off the bat, made Jedi Academy the most accessible and enjoyable game in the Jedi Knight series for most players. Not to discredit the other 4, but you do need to be in the right mindset to play those games. While Jedi Academy is a game you can play whenever, and since they ported this and Jedi Academy to the Switch, you can play it on the go potentially. I played the PC version, and I have to say the game was damn impressive. It's probably one of the most fun Star Wars games out there. It's far from story-rich, but the level design and gameplay is rivaled by few other Star Wars games I have played, and I have played a shitload. The premise alone already puts you through the fantasy of becoming a Jedi and learning the ways of the Force. The additional saber types also instantly made this far more moddable than Jedi Outcast. And this is why Jedi Academy is where the modding scene is at best, and not Jedi Outcast, because it made all the right improvements to gameplay. I'd say this is in the top 4 modded Star Wars games, behind Knights of the Old Republic, Battlefront 2, and Empire at War. And for the vanilla Jedi Academy, it gets an easy 9 out of 10. Same as Jedi Outcast, but the point is retracted for such a lackluster story. But still, the variety and the improvements to the previous game was enough to hold me over. Plus a lot of good references to stories like Dark Empire was a nice touch. Alright, so that's the Jedi Knight series. This wasn't originally supposed to be the end, because they wanted to make a third entry called Jedi Knight 3 Brink of Darkness. But of course Jim Ward was appointed as president of LucasArts, and canned a lot of projects through an audit. So LucasArts was in a hard position, but it wasn't like they were done for. They just had a stumble that set them back years, and they were well on their way to recovering before the dark times. Before Disney. Anyways, now that I'm done with the Jedi Knight series, the next game in line is Empire at War, as voted by my audience in a poll I did a long time ago. That means that it'll also be followed by the game's Forces of Corruption expansion, and after that, I'll see what you want me to do next. Knights of the Old Republic 2 is also in line as well, so don't worry about that. With that being said, I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Under the mountain, a golden fountain. Were you praying at the